Good evening, everybody. Let me call to order the Planning Commission meeting on Monday, December 16th, 2019. Can we get a roll call of the attendance?
Mr. Wadiska?
Here.
Mr. Rinkin?
Here.
Ms. Teets?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Puentas? Ms. Weiss?
The final two being absent. Can I get a motion to adopt this evening's agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous adoption. All right, do we have any petitions for those items not on the agenda? No. Okay, great. All right, well, the first item on our number 5 on our agenda is a speaker series. We are going to hear from Virginia Tech, and I'm not sure who's going to be doing the speaking.
Maybe I'll do just a brief introduction.
That'd be great.
Mr. Chair. So this is, yet again, another worthy planning effort by the students at Virginia Tech. And of course, it's just one in a many series of partnerships between the city and Virginia Tech to give some advanced looks to different areas of the city or different topics in the city that are deserving of attention. The student class this semester has been working in coordination with neighborhood groups on both the Fairfax County and the Falls Church side of the jurisdiction line in the Greenway Downs neighborhoods. And I guess before I give away too much of the storyline, I'll turn it over to them.
Well, thank you all for having us. So we were tasked with meeting with the Falls Church Route 29 Task Force. This is a community group focused on improving the quality of Route 29 from Graham Road to Tinner Hill. So we are Virginia Tech graduate students looking to kind of inform you on the 2 community meetings we've had so far with them. So this is our task force timeline, what we've accomplished so far, and what the task force is looking to do moving forward as our semester is coming to an end. So on October 2019, we had initial community impact or input meeting. This is where we met with the community group and we got their initial feedback on what they wanted to see improved on Route 29 from Graham Road to Tinner Hill, as I said. December 2019, we had a second meeting with that group. We presented our preliminary findings and recommendations, and we got some feedback from them, which we're going to share with you today. In the future, the task force is planning on taking our report that we are drafting for them right now and going to present to them in January. They're going to finalize that report with some of their recommendations, and they're hoping to hold an additional meeting sometime in, May or June, and then they're going to be gathering feedback from their group. So general recap, so this was our initial meeting in October. We had the community task force get together. They brought all the representatives from their community, and as many community members and business owners as we could have came and joined us. We gave an initial presentation on some of the concepts that are used for traffic calming in these areas. This is trying to reduce the speed of traffic flow along Route 29 and make it more walkable, to allow the citizens there to get across the street and to walk along the street safely and comfortably. So we gave an initial PowerPoint presentation. Then we had an exercise where all of the citizens got together, provided input on a series of 3-by-6 foot maps which had the study area, and they provided comments on sticky notes, some red, green, and yellow comments determining where there were safe and dangerous areas. And then we used that feedback and we generated some reports. So we went to initial analysis. I don't know if you have the presentation in front of you, but on the bottom is a general...
We do, but...
Oh, you do? Okay, good. On the bottom figure is an excerpt of some of the data points we collected. So we identified all of those sticky notes, as you can see in that image, which were comments from the citizens. We put them into a spreadsheet, and we basically started cataloging and categorizing all of their comments into different issues. So whether they were median issues, comments on sidewalks, turning lanes, whether they were suggesting we add or remove different elements along the street. And then we wanted to focus on, number 1, what the issues were, which was the category of issue. Number 2, where were the issues concentrated, which we used a GIS analysis for, which is Geographic Information Systems. And then number 3, we wanted to focus on the issues that were mentioned the most, So moving forward, these were kind of what were the comments. This is a direct result of our spreadsheet. We had a total of 117 comments. As you can see, sidewalks and crossings being like crosswalks, any method of getting across the street from the north to south or south to north side. Those were the main issues. The next two largest ones were traffic signals and buses, and we'll move forward and look at where they were concentrated. So one of the tools we used was a heat map. So this heat map is interactive. On the left, the pie chart is divided into the different issues along Route 29 based on the comments. We can use this heat map to filter based on what the issues were, and this allowed us to focus on not only where were all of the issues located, which is what the current heat map shows, but we also were able to focus on where each of the individual issues were concentrated. So now we'll have Maggie talk about our findings.
Hi, I'm Maggie Cooper. Oh, sorry, it's a little loud. So thank you, Andrew, for starting us off. So basically what we found were the sidewalk improvements along the western half of the study area were a big issue. Bus stop improvements between Woodlawn and Summerfield, the crosswalks between Greenway Downs and South Maple, and then the traffic light installation was a big issue between Greenway Downs and Tenor Hill. So they broke it down to the four different issues, and we have both the color that you can see there representing what we've just talked about for the crosswalks and bus stops, lights, and fourth one is, sorry, I can see over here better, and then the sidewalks improvement, and then recognizing kind of the different areas that they were of the most concern. Also want to mention that there are a couple of projects that are underway. There's that new traffic signal and crosswalks with access across Maple, which was really good to hear because that was something that we heard a lot of people talk about concerns there. We also found out about the Highway Safety Improvement Program that's going to be funding some traffic calming for this area, and then some proposed capital improvement programs for bus shelters and crosswalks. So using that information and then also what we heard, we came up with a couple recommendations for the group, focusing again on those four areas of sidewalks, crosswalks, bus stops, and traffic signals. So a couple the biggest general recommendation that we came up with was to just continue working together. We found that the conversations between the two sides, between Fairfax County residents and Falls Church residents, everything was a bit more passionate, more excited, and a little bit stronger when it was coming from both sides. So we really are encouraging the task force to continue to be a cross-jurisdictional group of people, so that we can make sure that this isn't something on the Falls Church side happens really well and the Fairfax County side not as much, because it's not going to help people on either side of the street to better access either sides of the street if it's only happening on one side. And this can happen through going to public meetings together, having joint grant applications together, and then just improved communication between the jurisdictions to make sure that when new sidewalks or new stoplights or new bus stops are going in, that the other jurisdiction knows so that they can take appropriate matters in the right areas to complement those projects. So specific recommendations for sidewalks are to have wider sidewalks. Not a shock there that people want wider sidewalks. There should be a prioritization on the west end, as that was the area that people said that was the most unsafe and they were most concerned about the sidewalks. We heard from a number of people that they really were excited about murals and public art. So we think that should be something that should be improved to improve the sidewalk experience. And then lastly, you can use public art, you can use signage, but make people realize that this is a community, and by people I mean drivers, and that they are driving through a neighborhood. This isn't just a random street that they should fly down. So bus stops, we spent a good bit of time looking at plans that already exist. There aren't a lot of recommendations that we could give them about bus stops that weren't in much more detail talked about in the Falls Church bus stop master plan. So we told them to look at that. We heard from a lot of people about there's a stop in front of a clinic that has protesters. And so for the safety of people who might be protesting and for safety of people getting off and on the bus and for safety just around that might be driving, that is a spot that should be possibly considered to be relocated so it's not such activity at one place. And then lastly, and we kind of recommend this with everything, is where the bus stops are with where there are crossings. And then we also heard, we saw some interesting things from VDOT about some non-intrusive devices. We are aware that we can make recommendations for a long time, but unless the right entities who are going to have to approve this are on board, they might not go anywhere. So one thing we saw was that VDOT really prioritizes and prefers the non-intrusive devices that are going to keep traffic moving, can keep snowplows coming through, can keep buses going through. So pavement markings to slow the traffic without stopping traffic. And then again, community gateways was something they also recommended to remind people that this is a neighborhood. And then two others, one being the speed display sign that Falls Church obviously has in a number of places, which can sometimes be impactful, and then the additional $200 fine signs. Don't know if that's as impactful, but it is non-intrusive. So then lastly, the last two recommendations were areas we covered were the crossings and then the traffic signals. So improving pedestrian crossings specifically at Marshall is something that came up a lot. Increasing pedestrian crossings across the whole street, between the whole scope of the area. But again, making sure that they coordinate with where people actually are already crossing and where traffic signals are going to possibly have people crossing. Also needs to be, again, coordination across all aspects of this plan. And I'll go really quickly through this, but just there's a number of different grants that we saw that we identified that the task force might have interest in and should encourage both jurisdictions to apply for. I'm not going to really go into too much detail on these, but we did hear at the meeting repeatedly that both we told people and then we heard people from the audience that were from different jurisdictions saying the VDOT applications are so much stronger when people have buy-in from both parties. And so having both jurisdictions, Fairfax and Falls Church, and having a lot of letters and a lot of support is going to be very helpful to get prioritization for those VDOT grants. So next steps, which Andrew covered a little bit, but we're presenting to you tonight. We're going to have the report to them in the next week or two. There's going to be continued community involvement. And then the task force is going to eventually approach the City of Falls Church and Fairfax County. And then hopefully there will be joint grant applications for the group moving forward. And we've already gone over the timeline. So I think I'll leave that up. Oops, I went too far. Dang it. There you go. All right.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Do we have any questions we'd like to ask on this? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, just wondering if you have any additional detail on the issue of the sidewalks, since that was the first on the list. Talk about wider sidewalks. Was there a focus on obstructions in the sidewalks or sidewalks in poor repair? Just wondering if it was just that one issue of just wanting to see wider sidewalks.
Yeah, I think there were all of the above. And we are happy to share. It's a big document, but we're happy to share all of the comments that we received. But yeah, we did have a little bit of all of that especially for the western part of the road.
I think this is really good. I actually used to live in the Jefferson Village area, and I would cross this part of the street fairly regularly. It's interesting that you mentioned the western sidewalk, which on the southern side seems pretty good. There's not really much on the northern side. But for me, my experience, the challenge was like, there's so many curb cuts, and in front of some other properties, the entire thing is a curb cut.
Yeah.
So you're like, I think I'm on the sidewalk, but there's cars flying in and out. So that to me is interesting, and obviously that the traffic signal at Maple is key to letting people get across there. But the question I had was, did you guys talk at all about redevelopment or anything? A lot of the uses right up on the street there are sort of somewhat dilapidated business uses, but there's not very much depth for redevelopment. So I don't know if you guys talked about that kind of.
We didn't talk about it too much, but we identified, the curb cut came up both in the original meeting and a lot of conversations that we had as a class, and then also in the presentation that we gave last week, because it is a big issue. It was outside the scope of our project, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be outside the scope of the final project that the task force comes forward with, because we talked a lot about there's short-term and kind of low-hanging fruit, and then there's the long-term, what is the actual vision for this area? And I think that the task force is really up for the challenge of thinking of what the vision for the area should look like long-term, which would address the businesses and land uses and pretty high-level things that are going to take a lot more time and visioning from a lot more people in the neighborhood. So it came up as an issue, but we didn't have a quick solution/recommendation for it.
But can I say one thing? In 2012, a Virginia Tech class did actually come up with a land use plan for both sides of the road along that corridor. We actually planned out parcel by parcel what the place could look like. So this class didn't deal with that, but there actually is a document that Paul knows well because he worked on it. So, you've got that in your library somewhere.
Yeah, so all the Virginia Tech studies are in the online planning library, and this one will shortly be added to it.
Now, Paul, who was the task force working with on the Fairfax side? I mean, at the Fairfax government level. I'm just curious who we were working with there.
We had a representative from the supervisor, just elected or recently elected.
Right, I was going to say, because there's a brand-new supervisor about to be sworn in this week.
Dahlia Palchek.
Right,
Yeah, so I believe her assistant was there.
okay.
And we also had somebody from VDOT, we had somebody from the county transportation, right, department. So we had really good representation from
Right.
both jurisdictions, which was great.
Great. I mean, 'cause as you can see, obviously, the city, we were able to sort of micro-focus on that corridor, and the county has a set of priorities that are much broader, and getting the county to focus on that several block stretch, I think, is, from what I've seen, seems to have been a struggle over the years, amongst other competing priorities, and so, perhaps with the new supervisor being elected and a fresh set of eyes, and especially hearing from the neighborhood, perhaps we could get some traction as far as making some changes on that side of the street, because on our side of the street, I feel like we've been much more proactive. And so, but it's pretty apparent when you see, granted, the land use patterns are a little different. We have some bigger, deeper lots, where we've seen redevelopment, but I think that's a real key on that side of the street, to get some political buy-in from the Providence District Supervisor, so that would be a good thing.
And the good thing is that I think 3 of the main leaders of this task force are from Fairfax County. So they are really committed. They're very determined to make something happen.
Great.
Terrific. How big is the task force? I guess I'm not familiar with it.
I'm sorry.
Well, there's a small working group of about maybe, say, 10 people, but I think they now have hundreds of people who joined through Facebook and whose emails they have and so forth. So it's a growing concern.
Yeah, I've been on their Facebook account. I actually, a scout leader I work with, a Girl Scout leader, her husband's on it as well, and they have a very vibrant Facebook page. Pretty easy to find it if you want to look at it.
We had over 70 people come to the first meeting, which we thought was a pretty great turnout. And then we had a little bit over 30 that attended the follow-up last week.
Yeah, and then over on Shreve Road, there's also a lot of momentum. A lot of people who live in the Shreve Road neighborhoods, that they're also very, since they had that accident where the woman was hit there, they're very much want to see more sidewalks and more things done on Shreve to slow it down, because people do drive too fast on it.
And the person who was heading up a community safety or pedestrian safety group actually came to the meeting last week, too.
Right.
And he spoke a little bit.
Yeah. So, one thing I was saying is, like, you, one of the things that you talked about is you're going to talk about some of those grants that would be possible. Are you going to, how much detail are you going to put into that section? Like, Like, are you going to make suggestions, like these would be the grants that would be best for sidewalks, or these would be the grants? I mean, I think our staff probably knows some of them anyway, but I kind of think like with reports like this, and they're all great reports. I've read all the Virginia Tech ones. We have a beautiful one for Jefferson Street that I wish we could do. Like, that's the best, where we ended up with like cafes on a stream that's being taken care of instead of what happens now where we have auto parts in it. But but I think the problem with all of them is that they have lovely vision, but not enough action stuff at the end. And I would just say that it's nice to have this vision and thoughts, but it's more actions that are in there that the best.
We don't want to throw 200 possibilities in a report.
No,
and
I'm
yeah,
not suggesting that, but like, you guys know this, I mean, you have your top 3 there, which was sidewalks and crossings, and, like, concentrating on that.
Yes, definitely.
Anything like that is helpful.
Yeah.
So once the report gets sent to the city and county, I appreciate that your involvement is over, but what's the next steps in terms of having this get to something that can be actionable at this? We get a report, comes to the city and county, and then it goes to what's the next step in terms of that process?
Then it's up to us, right, in some degree. I mean,
Like CIP kind of funding, is that what we're?
Yeah, the
just-
first step that'll come before the commission is, as the students mentioned, there's a draft CIP project being put together at the staff level to look at bus shelters to complete that 2015 bus shelter master plan, and as part of that, to update the pedestrian crossings over or across Route 29. So that, I think, would be the first, the leverage point for the planning commission.
And we would just be commenting or making decisions based on our side of the road, even though this was a two-party, is the word we were using here, recommendations, even though this was coming from Fairfax County and those on the Falls Church. I mean, we don't have jurisdiction to say we're making these wholesale changes. How does that all, I just, if we're picking crossings and traffic lights and things like that, I don't know, how does that work with the two jurisdictions on a road like that?
It's
Does
a
VDOT get
staff
involved?
conversation. I mean, we've had successful examples of that. In fact, the crossing that's designed now for Washington and Maple, of course, required that kind of coordination. Majority of the intersections actually in Fairfax County. The same thing is going on now for the $15.7 million grant at West Falls Church required coordination and requires ongoing coordination with Fairfax County and VDOT. And of course, the application the city just submitted for the WNOD connector along Shreve Road, the most of that is in Fairfax County. So there's been a history of being able to work at that supervisor level, reaching out to the supervisor's office, reaching out to the affected neighborhoods, and then working it up that way.
But so agreed, I mean, obviously there's a lot of interaction between Falls Church and Fairfax, but in terms of our role, we would just say this looks like a good plan from our side of the street, or, and this is something we want to see discussed at the council/supervisor role. Just, the steps seem to me, since you'll have a whole task force and a whole report on this, as opposed to just saying, oh, this is something we want to take a look at. I'm not sure I follow how our role plays into this then larger.
I mean, it's certainly
Nick?
something we can look at, and whether this maybe requires a different approach from usual, given the level of public interest that there's been around this. There may be an opportunity to pick up some dialogue at higher levels than just staff right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just an intersection, it's a whole stretch of roadway, a whole corridor, so it's, all right, well, this is very informative. It's certainly an area that needs some attention, as the task force has identified, and it's wonderful that you've taken the time to try to dig into this and provide some clarity about actually what's needed, so
Sure, thank you.
this was informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, back to the action items. We have lots of meeting minutes to approve, most of them from the beginning of the year. The last couple of meetings we've been catching up. So This was a arduous process, the last meeting. Basically, what we did is well, let me ask in general before we go one by one. We're going to go one by one to get the votes. Were there any comments on any of these minutes? January 14th, January 22nd, February 4th, February 19th, March 4th, and then actually the last meeting, December 2nd. That anybody wanted to change before we go one by one? Yeah. Yeah, it looked fine to me too as well. So, all right. So let's move to action 6A, and we're going to take a vote, a roll call vote about each one to see.
We need a motion, right?
Yeah, motion,
Each
exactly.
one. All right, I'll move, we're going to do one by one. I'll move we adopt the January 14th, 2019 minutes as presented.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And Mr. Puentes wasn't there, so he doesn't even have to abstain.
He's abstaining anyway.
He's abstaining anyway. Okay, let's move on to January 22nd. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes from January 2nd, 2019?
Okay, I'll move that we adopt the January 22nd, 2019 minutes as presented.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye. And no, Andy was not there. Would you like to
I was
abstain?
late, it said.
He was late, he showed up.
Okay, he's not abstaining, he's accepting.
Wait, which one is this?
It says January 22nd, it says,
That's the next one.
oh, it says arrived after roll call. I see, got it, okay.
This is it's a February 4th that you weren't
I
there.
I roll in a little bit late
Got it.
sometimes.
All right, moving on to the February 4th. Can I get a motion to adopt the,
That's the one I apparently wasn't at.
you should make the motion then.
Move to approve the February 4th minutes?
Second,
All those are in favor, say aye. Aye. And,
Abstain, apparently.
yeah, there we go.
I'll move that we adopt the minutes from February 19th.
Wait, it's not on the screen yet.
Oh,
You're jumping the
okay.
gun. Can I get a motion for the February 19th?
Okay, I move that we.
We could just do like
adopt-
you make the motion, Tim, you can
This'll
second, we can
teach us
just
to-
roll through it.
Okay,
Later.
I move that we adopt the February 19th, 2019 minutes as presented.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Nobody was missing. Great.
Okay.
Can I get a motion to adopt March 4th, 2019?
I move.
Minutes.
that we adopt the March 4th, 2019 meeting minutes as presented.
And I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. And then finally, last meeting. We were all present. Can I get a motion to adopt December 2nd, 2019 meeting minutes?
I move that we adopt the December 2nd, 2019 meeting minutes as presented.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Terrific.
Are we all caught up now? Are those
Yeah,
all
I was
the
going to say,
minutes?
we all caught up?
For 2019, yeah.
Well, we haven't had 2020, so that's a yes.
We're missing, I think we have the
Good.
2018 that we caught up on.
Oh, really?
Oh, we have 2018 we haven't caught up on? Okay.
All right.
All right, let's move on to the more substantive issue. All right, we have a public hearing on the 807 Villa Ridge subdivision. So let's, we're going to hear a staff report on this first.
Yes.
Mrs. Aruzi?
Good evening, Planning Commission. Akita Ruzi with Planning. The Planning Commission held a work session on November 4th to discuss the preliminary plat for this subdivision. During the work session, staff heard questions and comments from the commission related to the city's definition of a pipe stem lot and whether this subdivision should be subject to the pipe stem regulations. Sure. Specifically, the Planning Commission expressed concerns of what they perceive to be a loophole within the definition of a pipe stem that allows the applicant to work around more restrictive setback regulations unique to the pipe stem subdivision. As staff continues to evaluate the subdivision and related zoning regulations, the applicant was asked to explore a true pipe stem configuration for the Commission's feedback and guidance tonight. So tonight, staff recommends continuing the public hearing for the earlier iteration of the plat to January 21st. Staff also requests the Planning Commission hold a work session to hear a presentation by the applicant on a true pipe stem concept under the current zoning code.
All right, terrific. Well, I do think we are going to make a motion to postpone consideration, but before we do that, let me open it up to the public, because this was an advertised public hearing. So if anyone would like to speak on this issue, you may come forward, fill out a speaker slip, and come to the mic. Have we received any speaker slips on this issue? No? Is anybody here for this issue? You are? Would you like to speak, or, because we are going to continue it, and we have a work session later this evening where we actually talk about, at that point, we don't welcome public comment. The public comment happens during the public meeting. And then we are going to have this follow-on public hearing on January 21st, which you're also welcome to speak at once you hear what we talk about. But I want to give you the opportunity before we make a motion to continue it. To this.
Will they be speaking after or as a part of the work session?
No public speaking during that.
It would be helpful to be informed by what goes on in that work session.
No problem. It was an advertised public meeting, so I wanted to give you the opportunity. And then we're going to have the work session, and then at that point, you'd have an opportunity to speak on January 21st. But we'll.
Can I ask a question about the January 21st? So that would be a public hearing, and then will there be a time for us to submit written comments after that? Or what will be the agenda for the 21st meeting? Will a decision be made at that time?
Yes, a decision would be made at that time.
So how do we, as the residents, have an opportunity to really submit our concerns?
From now until then, and you can submit at any time, from right now all the way through January 21st. You can submit based on the most current plans and proposal.
So we have to wait for essentially the completion of this work session to see what the latest plans are, and then we can come.
Apparently, there's a new plan, apparently, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
What's the speaker slip process?
It's very simple. We had speaker slips out there, but I don't know if we have any up at the desk here. But you just fill out your name and address, and then you're given 3 minutes to speak about what your concerns are. Your concerns may not radically change based on what we hear today. We've received a bunch of comments, written correspondence, so I have some sense of what the concerns are. But if you had other ones that you wanted to speak on, just in general, you have an opportunity.
You have 3 minutes to talk about whatever you'd like, essentially. I'm not being cute, it's true. Anything you'd like to talk about.
If you'll give me 30 seconds without the speaking part,
You definitely have, I do need you to fill out this just form. It's your name and address, and then you need to come to the microphone.
And I guess in the meantime, while he's filling out his speaker slip or whatever, just a question as to the process between now and the 21st. Are you going to be meeting with the developer, or what's happening?
We really aren't supposed to have a dialogue back and forth off the record. If people want to speak, you should come up and fill out a slip and speak and ask these questions, and let's follow the procedures, because we really can't banter back and forth from the dais.
Yeah, things need to be recorded, and we can't record it when you're out there.
And if you're going to speak, you need to give your name and address, and so for the record.
Okay. My name is Matt Elkin at 809 Villa Ridge.
Thank you.
There'll be more to say after we get more information, but I do just want to emphasize that there are certainly some lots in Falls Church that should not be subdivided, either because it legally cannot be, or it economically cannot be, or perhaps in some cases, both. This is probably one of those lots that just simply should not be subdivided. And I ask you to look carefully at, I appreciate that you did already look carefully at the pipe stem requirements in 48-1. I also ask you to look carefully at the integrity of the neighborhoods in 48-234, preserving residential open space in the same section, preserving natural landscaping space in the same section, related to the pipe stem requirements, the yard requirements in 48-238, the lot coverage, including the impervious lot coverage, including multiple long driveways, and fire access to the road, to any house in the back, the scale of development in 48-1136, the spatial relationship of the development to homes and the placement relative to adjacent homes, the landscaping configuration, also in 48-1136, a landscaping plan that is compliant with 44-109A, and also a stormwater provisions, which affects the neighborhood very greatly, that need to be specified, including the calculations as described in the requirements for a site plan. These are just some of the requirements. I think when you put all these together, it's evident that just some lots cannot be subdivided. It just doesn't make sense, and it isn't simply compliant with code. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Gish. I'm the owner of the lot at 207 North Van Buren Street, which is directly adjacent to the north of the Villa Ridge Road property, and so tremendously affected by runoff issues. I did submit some written comments, so I won't really go over those again, but I am concerned about the process, which is a question that I had started to ask before, as to, now I know you'll be hearing from the developer tonight about the revised pipe stem plan that he has, but, and then you're planning to vote on the 21st, at which I guess there'll be public comments, but it sounds like you will probably already have your minds made up before you come into the 21st meeting, and the public comments, I guess, are just for the record, because I imagine you'll come prepared for the 21st and have your minds made up. So my question was, I guess, what happens between now and then that you prepare and to make your decision that you're going to be making on the 21st? And is there, other than submitting additional written comments, is there any other participation, any other meetings or anything that the public can be involved in?
Well, let me just answer that. The first is that while we come prepared, I don't think that the public comments are wasted at all, that I think that the commission takes those into consideration when having the conversation with the developer and ultimately voting. So we do the comments typically in the beginning part of it, and then listen to the developer, and then are able to make a decision incorporating those comments. In between now and the 21st, the staff may work with the developer to answer some of the questions that come up during the work session that we're going to have today, but there is no other public session that is happening between us and the developer. So they propose a plan. We come during tonight. If you hang around, you'll hear the questions that we have. Some of those are based on the comments we've already received, some of our own concerns, and we'll say these are issues that need to be addressed or need to be considered before you bring it back to us on the 21st. And at that point, we'll get a new package, depending on whether it's their option to say, nope, this is it. We've heard your comments and we're going to continue with our current submission, or they say, all right, we've made these changes or these adjustments or took these things into account, and then we'll have that information. But as far as the public process, it's what goes on this evening at the work session, and then prior to the vote on the 21st.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I don't come usually with my mind made up. And in fact, one of the reasons why we're not voting on it tonight is because at the last meeting, there was comments and concerns, and that's why it's being postponed. So it's entirely possible that on the 21st, we will vote to postpone again if there are serious concerns that haven't been resolved to our satisfaction. So it's definitely not true that we come in knowing how we're going to vote. I will say that our packets get prepared about a week ahead of time, so the majority of these comments, like I literally am seeing them here right now. I haven't read them because a lot of them are dated this afternoon. So if you do have comments that you want us to be able to consider in the meeting, getting them in several days ahead of time or a week ahead of time is super beneficial, because I read all this stuff several days before these meetings, and I don't come to the meeting hours early to read stuff that just came in. So strongly encourage people, if you have your thoughts sorted out ahead of time, and you're welcome to just bring them and present them in the meeting, but it definitely gives us less time to consider them. And if you already know them, a week, it's like 1 week ahead of time is when we put together the packet.
Right. And I would
Super helpful.
And I would just add, again, in the interim period between now and the next public meeting, would certainly encourage you, it sounds like you've already been in contact with staff, but staff is the one who would be working with the developer during that period of time, and staff would be your liaison to any issues that you might have, as far as any revisions or updates on how things are proceeding before the next public session.
Yeah, and we actually won't know what their final, decision is on what they submit until that package comes out. The same time that you can see it is when we will see it, which means if they've made substantial changes from what we've seen before, we will come in with a bunch of questions. And a lot of our decisions are based on what happens in that package.
And when will that final package come out?
A week in advance usually.
Yeah, about a week
A week
before
in
the,
advance, yeah.
before the meeting.
So,
It's posted online.
yeah. So, well, for staff, how's the best way for them to make sure they find that package?
The best way to find that package.
You send us a link. So-
Yeah, right, we send you a link, but certainly we can send that same link to everyone we've received electronic comments from. That way we've got your email on file, and we know that when the item gets posted, we can make you all aware of that package posting at the same time.
Okay, all right, thank you. I guess if I could just one more question about this sidewalk requirement. I'm just curious as to where that comes from, who imposes that. I think a lot of the neighbors are questioning why a sidewalk, and is this going to be counterproductive with a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk as far as the aesthetics of the neighborhood goes? Where does that requirement come from, I guess?
It's basically the city is looking to put sidewalks in most of the residential neighborhoods. So Villa Ridge doesn't, it has sidewalks on one side partially, but on the other side it does not. And so whenever redevelopment is happening, we're trying to look to see, can we put a piece of sidewalk in the hopes of eventually connecting it all.
No, there's no sidewalk on Villa Ridge that I know of.
I thought there was some on the other side, further up, closer to Buxton. There was a little bit of sidewalk. But, okay,
No.
well, regardless, the street it would be good for the street to have a sidewalk.
But
For safety?
it can only happen if a property is redeveloped, totally redeveloped, I suppose.
correct.
Okay.
Well,
so-
the other side of it is eventually, over time, the city comes into grant money for sidewalks, and we'll be able to put money towards sidewalks in neighborhoods. So that's the long-term goal. But that's where it comes from. It comes from a desire to try to get sidewalks on most of our major residential streets, so it's safer for people. And I've seen lots of people walking their dogs on Villa Ridge, and on a dark night with cars parked on both sides, it's not a lot of room there. So,
Yeah, there's no other sidewalk in the whole neighborhood.
Right. And
Lots.
and it can be waived, but it's something that we consider very carefully, because anytime we can get a developer to pay for sidewalk as opposed to the city taxpayers paying for sidewalk, that's a huge benefit, but it obviously has to make sense, and we understand that, so it can be modified. But it's in the city code, it's in the subdivision ordinance, or it's a requirement as part of the improvements when one is subdividing and developing, is various improvements in the right-of-way. Sometimes that includes sidewalks, but it can be modified and can be waived, but it's something that we consider very carefully before we would do that, so. But we hear you, we hear you.
Okay, so, if the expense of that, if that could be waived in return for other improvements to the property, it might be worth.
Fortunately, I don't think we can do that, right? Take the value of a sidewalk and ask them to apply.
I don't think so, no, that's not my
Good
understanding.
idea, though.
All right, thank you.
Out of our pay grade.
Would anyone else like to speak on this before we continue this? All right. We got one more? Okay.
I'm Doug Biggs. I live at 209 Van Buren Street. I'm at the bottom of the waterfall that's going to come from this. I just want to really make that point that you really got to take that water conservation in effect here, and I'd like to submit some video of the last of a couple storms that we had, so that you could view that and see the river that comes down from that wall, or from that yard in particular. So who would I send that to?
City
Believe
staff
yeah.
could distribute that. We could show it at a meeting. I don't know if we're going to do it tonight, but, if you, right, isn't there capability to show video?
If it's on a thumb drive, we'd have to, we would scan it.
Well, I just want you to be aware of the problem here, because I had You know, the city told me 5 years ago when we had a flood that they acknowledged that the pipes were too small. And here I just see that this is going to it's going to get the potential for being a bigger problem. And I haven't seen anything done about that, and we could, you know, about the whole Mr. Trauberman issue and all the problems with the water. We just finished a renovation that I'm just worried about the safety of my house here. So I hope you take that into effect.
You may be interested, too, in attending on this Wednesday evening, I think, is the first organizational meeting of the task force that the city has set up to citizen task force to deal with flooding. So it may be something you want to follow as well. They're going to be recorded, so it'll be available to you through that route.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? No, okay.
I'm Tracy Biggs, also at 209 Van Buren, and I just wanted to seriously echo the concerns with regard to subdividing this property. Because of the runoff, the water issues in that whole area, it's hard to believe that two houses on that property can really contain all the water that's going to run off and really affect much more than the adjacent properties, but really the whole surrounding properties in that area. And as my husband noted, there's been no improvements, there's been no attempt by the city to update the drainage system to address the infrastructure problems, and sort of this continued development and deference to doubling up houses in neighborhoods where the water problem's not adequately dealt with is really not a very good long-term solution or approach, or I'm not sure what the right word is, but it really presents difficulties for the residents who are already there. And so we really think that the city should think very seriously about the issue of subdivision itself and the whole issue of the water. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, unless there are any other comments, I am going to close the public hearing portion of this meeting. And because of the pending work session and the forthcoming information, I will entertain a motion to postpone consideration of this item. Anyone?
Mr. Chair, I move to postpone consideration of subdivision application number 2019-0952 and continue the public hearing to January 21st of 2020.
Second.
All right. Can we get a roll call vote on that?
Mr. Wadiska,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Mr. Rankin,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
All right. Unanimous. Thank you for your comments. We are going to go through a few more agenda items, and then I don't know, 30 minutes maybe, we'll be working on we'll deal with the work session on this topic. So you're more than welcome to hang around. All right, moving on to item 7A. Do we have any planning commissioner reports to report on? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, we had a very uplifting ceremony tonight over at the schools for the initiation of the ground source heat pump wells. So it's a big issue for the little city, and we were well represented by City Council, School Board. We had visitors from Denver, from the National Renewable Energy Lab, from Department of Energy, from the Council of Governments. So it was a very positive event. So just wanted to make mention of that.
Terrific.
So Parks and Recs, the committee, they have finished the new entrance to the Howard Herman. I don't know if anyone's noticed it, so there's a
I did
new, really
notice.
attractive
How could you
arch.
not notice? Come on.
Well, the whole point was before that, no one could figure out that was an entrance to a park. So now,
Especially when there was
hopefully, you
those
can actually.
cones blocking it.
Yeah, well, I would have, we have like habitat restoration events in there, and we'd have to be like, go to Penzi Spices, look for an opening, walk in.
In the woods and
Yeah, exactly.
sneak in there.
But so now we have this nice entrance, which is really great. And also the groundbreaking has happened for Big Chimneys Park, and so that will actually be closed probably for the next 8-9 months or so as they do construction there. The good news is at one point, they were concerned that the stormwater feature, there's a big stormwater feature to this renovation of the park because the second bottom half of that park was flooded all the time. And they were afraid it was going to cost enough that they were cutting down on some of the amenities in the park, but actually it came in at a better price. So they were able to put everything back into that they originally planned. So, I think it's going to be really exciting to see how it turns out. It's going to have, a lot of new equipment, playground equipment. It's going to deal with the water. It's going to help the residents next door deal with water. It's going to be like a real plus for the city.
That's my backyard, so I'm super excited about it. Any other planning commission reports?
At the EDC meeting, we talked a little bit about scooters. The city council passed the pilot program, and now they're struggling with the existing code, which technically makes scooters on sidewalks illegal, so they're trying to figure out what to do about that. And then the most interesting thing was the return of the Broad and North Washington project, if you recall.
Yep.
Although now it's, instead of an office building and a big restaurant, it's a grocery store and more apartments. And it also, at least the current version, incorporates the city's public parking lot back there. I would say at the EDC, there was mixed reaction to that. And I assume we will get more information about it at some point. But I personally have concerns about the parking lot plan and swapping out an office building for a grocery store and a bunch of apartments. But I'm sure there's more to learn in the coming weeks and months on that. Tim, were you there? I wasn't. Oh, he wasn't there.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I saw it. I mean, now, granted, having the Whole Foods there is a good thing to have.
I guess, because we
and,
don't
well,
have enough
grocery
grocery
stores
stores.
make a lot of tax money for us.
At some point, you get enough grocery stores, but.
I know, but it makes sense. I think that they weren't interested before when there was going to be an organic market going into Tenor, and now that that's the target, I think they're more interested in that location.
Because they haven't noticed the Harris Teeter?
No, it's a different market. Like, I don't.
I understand.
It is.
I understand.
So I still drive to the Whole Foods in Tyson's, and so if that Whole Foods, and that Whole Foods is going to shut down. They built a new one in McLean, and this is going to take care of their customers on this side. So they actually have a built-in customer base that's not going to be served when that old one closes. So I can see why they do it, but I still think it's hard for me to lose that much commercial office space and not have any come back in. And the reason I say that is someone who's looked for an office twice in the city, and you also, it is very difficult to find office space available in this city. And I understand we're being told Northern Virginia, there's too much office space, but there isn't too much office space here in the city. And so I think that if there was anything I would push at those EDC meetings is that some office space would be needed to make this a little bit more palatable, especially if they want to use the parking lot.
Yes. So.
Do we have a sense of when that's coming to the planning commission?
I think we've pulled together at the staff level a tentative schedule for Broad and Washington review in terms of a date for planning commission. Do we have one?
Roughly?
Yeah,
I do not have the schedule in front of me, but.
Are we
I
talking about
think summer.
Q1 or, okay, summer? We got it.
Summer, yeah, I don't have the schedule, sorry.
Yeah. So it's a while, but.
Okay.
And clearly it was early, what they're circulating is early version, like the design is not really designed. I mean, it's, yeah.
Well, I think it's
look like much.
good
It did
to
have
hear
a-
feedback in this meeting. where
And
they
it did
said-
have a kind of a cutout on the corner to try to make a little bit of a plaza there, which I think people like that idea. I think the execution of it was a little weak, but, so I think there's a lot to be looked at there. It's definitely not just a slight update from the last proposal.
Yeah.
I think they have, in this updated proposal, they have taken a lot of those comments that were part of the conversation last time in terms of the design of the plaza, the ability of the general public to access it, how the streetscape lays out at that prominent corner at Broad and Washington, getting that grocery store back, right, the conversation tonight about Whole Foods, it is a different market, and it does have a regional draw in its nature, so putting a Whole Foods in downtown Falls Church certainly extends not only the grocery store market for the city, but other things that people would want to shop for while they're also at the Whole Foods. So it does expand the city's profile in terms of retail.
Yeah, and I sort of joke about grocery stores, I think it's great. There was going to be an office building there, and
Yeah.
now there's not.
So they didn't hear
with the
those
current
comments.
plan. And I will say.
Those comments were pretty strong.
And I will say, they didn't mess with the backside, so all the, rounds of negotiations there with the neighbors
Oh, with
seems
Lawn
to be
Street, everything
intact.
with
Yeah.
Lawn Street's still there.
So they seem to have understood that. Now, since the if the city lot space is incorporated, that's going up against a couple other houses, so there'll be some issue there. Anyway, we don't need to talk about it. We got months till we can
Right.
talk about it, but that was the first official word I had heard of that rumored update to that project.
Okay. Mr. Krasner, you good?
I'm good.
All right, so am I. All right. Moving on to correspondence. This was about like city art, is that, what is it?
Yeah, this is an application or a letter of support on the, from city staff reaching out to ask for assistance from UVA. They're running their student studio projects in the upcoming timeframe, reaching out to get help to develop a community art policy that would help the city advance its efforts for things like murals and public art, the same things you heard the Virginia Tech students in the Greenway Downs neighborhood asking for. And so we'll hope to hear back on whether the city is selected.
Okay, great. And now the director's report.
Thank you, Commissioners. A few items in your packet for your report. Most of them are information updates, quarterly surveys from Building Safety and Economic Development, informing you all of what's going on in those offices. Building Safety, a lot of items about construction, tenant fit-outs, hiring of new staff. Steve Helfer recently joined the city, adding his 34 years of experience to city staff, which is certainly welcome. It's a heavy building time for the city, so the more help we can get, the better. Economic Development, of course, continuing partnership and the New Virginia Economic Development Alliance just getting started, which I hear talk about on NPR, which is my barometer for whether it's having impact or not, and I think it is. Northern Virginia jurisdictions banding together and marketing themselves as a region versus individual jurisdictions. And then the other item in the packet there, major project update on the status of the high school construction, what's going on in terms of the foundation, getting up to grade, pouring the structure, laying the structure for the upper levels, and the positive impact that building safety is having. I think one of the things we're thinking about as a group is whether one of the inspectors will probably be positioned perhaps full-time up there, maybe looking for some temporary office space we could have so that someone is available on site so that we can provide timely assistance as construction is ongoing.
Okay.
Let's see, update that's not included in your report, but this is a request to fill out the Planning Commission satisfaction surveys by the end of this week so we can get that information compiled and ready for your review at your January organizational meeting.
Yes, that was mentioned 2 weeks ago, so that should be on everybody's list. Get the surveys in. All right, that concludes the director's report, correct?
That is everything for my report, yes.
All right. All right, moving on then to the work session. The first item is the W&OD Dual Trails Site Plan.
Yes, so first work session item tonight, W&OD Dual Trails Site Plan. This has now been submitted. This was seen by the commission before, earlier this calendar year, I think it was in July. You had the opportunity to review the 30% engineering plans. Now as the Nova Parks team has gotten this up to 60%, they've started the formal site plan submission process, which of course they'll need before they can issue their, go out for construction bid. I want to turn it over to Jeff Hollern for the staff report. Just a couple of things to highlight. Planning staff is looking for feedback on specific items. The design of the project, just double checking comfort with the layout of the trail, the typical standards, the noticing process, whether the staff and Nova Park should be looking at something beyond the typical letters to nearby property owners. Administrative approval versus planning commission approval, and then a fourth item that recently popped up is coordinating stormwater efforts with city staff. There's been conversations at the staff level on how that can play out, and that'll probably get updated with the next site plan submission. But with that, for a fuller report, I'll turn it over to Jeff Hollern.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jeff Hollern with the planning staff. I'm going to reiterate a couple of things Paul just said. Tonight, the Planning Commission is requested to hold a work session to review and discuss the 60% engineering plans for the W&OD Dual Trails project. In addition, To the commission's standard review, staff is asking for feedback on a few specific topics. First, does the proposed design meet city standards for safe, accessible green spaces that we ask for within our city's comprehensive plan and WNOD master plan? Second, does the scale and span of the WNOD park and trail, or given the scale and size of the trail, should we use other noticing tools in addition to the standard requirements typically executed during the site plan process? Third, the project qualifies for administrative approval. However, the WNOD's prominence and footprint within the city, would the commission prefer to retain their site plan approval powers and see amended materials at a future public hearing on this application? And again, as Paul mentioned, one additional topic of discussion that staff has had with the applicant, not listed on the staff report, has been stormwater management and the beginning of coordination between Nova Parks and the city public works staff to improve the stormwater infrastructure along the path during the construction of this project. So to review the scope of the project, the development proposal seeks to construct parallel walking and biking trails in the WNOD Railroad Regional Park between Northwest Street and Little Falls Street. The project would include replacing the existing 10-foot wide shared use trail with an 11-foot wide bicycle trail and an 8-foot wide pedestrian trail, separated by a 2-foot wide stamped asphalt buffer. Regrading much of the park, updated stormwater management, and coordination with the ongoing Founders Row and city projects that are updating the at-grade street crossings of the WNOD trail. The applicant presented 30% plans at the Planning Commission's July 1st, 2019 work session. Since that time, the plans have progressed to 60% design, and the applicant has formally submitted for site plan approval as of November 1st. DRC staff reviewed the plans and relayed a comment letter to the applicant on the 21st of November. The development team has already preemptively responded to them ahead of their second submission, as you can see in your materials, and will address them in their 90% submission later this month. The Washington and Old Dominion Railroad Regional Park stretches a distance of 45 miles between Arlington County and Loudoun County. The portion of the park within the city measures approximately 16 acres in size, making it the second largest park space in the city behind the playing fields at George Mason High School and Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School. The mixed-use trail allows for both recreational and practical passage through the city, as it is suitable for pedestrians, bicyclists, scooters, or any types of non-motorized transport. It serves several purposes to Falls Church and the Northern Virginia region, including recreation and exercise, transportation, scenic natural environments in an otherwise residential or urban setting, and provides wider access to the city's commercial districts. These proposed improvements to the WNOD trail carry out a considerable portion of the city's vision for the path laid out in the WNOD master plan. Not only does the plan request separated walking and biking paths, but it also calls for the restoration of landscaping and lighting along the park, of which the project also addresses. This along with the city's ongoing work on the 4 crossings along the trail that will enhance safety and visibility of riders, pedestrians, and vehicles alike. The dual trails and trail crossing projects are a result of an ongoing coordination between city staff, Nova Parks, NVTA, and others to bring the vision of the WNOD master plan to life. The tentative timeline included within the staff report includes a late December resubmission of the dual trail site plan, which will be considered a 90% design plan. Pending the remaining staff comments are brief and that the applicant is timely on the responses to them, the action on this project can take place as early as January 2020. The team at Nova Parks and AMT Engineering are working diligently to hit the spring construction season to make sure that the improvements are completed during the summer. I'll now turn it over to the applicant for any remarks and further discussion.
Great, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Paul Gilbert, Executive Director of Nova Parks, and thank you for having us. I want to introduce Jeff Tarbert and Paul Baldino, who are our 2 board members from Falls Church on the Nova Parks board, and Brian Nolan, who is our Director of Planning and Development, and you'll hear from our engineering consultant in just a moment. this is a really exciting moment that we're creating this dual trails on the WNOD. And we came to Falls Church to do it first because Falls Church was the first section of the WNOD opened in 1974. Our vision is to hopefully continue this dual trails treatment in all the urban areas along the WNOD in the years ahead. And so we want to get it really right here in Falls Church and have this be, again, the leader of developing kind of the WNOD for the next century. We presented the initial design to the city in 2017 when we were working on the grant for Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. As you heard from Jeff, we came back in July at 30%, and now we're at 60%, close to 90%. As we're adding the more and more granular details to the plan, it looks very much the same as it has been, but that's great because it really is going to be a fantastic improvement. One of the things we've been really working on is to try to upgrade the stormwater. I know that's a big issue in the city, and the existing trail really has no stormwater features. It was, an asphalt strip put down in the 70s and 80s. The new rebuilt trail will have swales, will have meadows, have some new technology called modular wetlands, all designed to capture all the stormwater that's generated on the trail and treat it right there. So we're very excited about that. We're working with city staff on other stormwater infrastructure that is on the trail, so that those things can be addressed. One of the things we're particularly concerned about, I guess, too, is timing, because this is an NVTA grant. We want to make sure that we are hitting those grant timelines, spending the money when we're supposed to spend it, building it when we're supposed to build it, because that will affect their interest in funding future projects by Nova Parks and future projects by the city. And I know the city has, many transportation issues as well as we do. So we want to make sure that we're meeting our deal with NVTA and that they continue to view this as a great partnership. One of the issues that I'm particularly concerned is cost, because we're seeing almost every construction bid that we do these days coming in at much higher than estimated amounts. So we should be able to build this with the estimated costs, but we are seeing things go up in price quite a bit. So with that, I will turn it over to our engineer to add more, Steve Torson, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you for having us back again. It's good to be here. So some of you have, well, most of you have actually seen the portions of the slide presentation. And with that, we'll go through this. It has been edited to reflect some of the updates that have happened since we first presented. And do I have power to that, or do I have to go over there? Oh, you're okay. Thank you. So this was really our vision, is to focus on safety, making sure that there was sufficient capacity to carry the number of users that use the trail, both bikers and hikers and joggers and strollers and everything else. Options for ecology, how to maintain it. Obviously, we have a partnership here. This is Nova Parks, but it's also the city, and also many utilities use the corridor. And then price, as Paul mentioned. This is a new slide. We took some of the inspiration from some of the other dual trails that have been implemented, and you see that here in the slide where you can see how the dual trails are actually butted next to each other in a similar fashion to what we are proposing. So here's our project limits. We're basically going here from Grove Avenue to Little Falls here. And these crossings here are being updated currently with the Founders Row redevelopment, and the construction's already happening right now as we speak. And that construction, we've designed the trail to tie directly into that. And then these crossings here are being completed by the city with their consultant tool design. You've seen these images, but this is what the trail looks like today. There are a couple memorial plazas, for example, the Walter Mess, which you see an image here. And then the Veterans Commons, which you see here. So the trail really is broken down into these two typologies. And where you see the 16 feet trail is where we're tapering down to tie back into the existing trail network. But what we're focusing on, and where much of the trail is the image at the top, where we have this 2-foot trail divider, the pedestrian pathway, the 5-foot filter strip, and then stormwater management swale. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. There are places where the trail does divide, especially around the power poles. This is what it looks like in a perspective. And you can see that, and this is a joke, we have a little river running right here. So the filter strip right here is required for stormwater management to make it work. This is what some of the latest grading looks like, and I'm going to show 2 shots. But the red lines that you're seeing here are basically the limits of the property. And you can see that with the dual trail running parallel to each other, how close it's coming out in some places. And in some places, the grading is even, it's just inside that boundary. But it's important to note that this is one of the reasons that we chose the dual trail to appear the way it's appearing, with the 11-foot, the 2-foot buffer, and then the 8 feet. It's the same image with the grading taken off, but you can see where the dual trails are. This is pedestrian here, this is for bikes, and then you see the asphalt pavement in between. Another location. So there's been lots of discussion about what this space in between, the stamped asphalt, and the appearance of it. And here are some examples. They are larger examples than what we will be using, but what they do is they actually heat the asphalt up. And then once they heat the asphalt up, they actually press into the asphalt a pattern. And so you can see here on this image, this groove that exists. And then they put a thermoplastic on top of that, and then they heat that up so that it molds down into the asphalt, and it adheres to the asphalt. And so we will get a durable visual separation between the two trails, and that's what we're focused on. We're still looking at the color and the actual pattern. We don't know that yet, but this is the general aesthetic. So our stormwater solution, we have 7.7 acres, and with the 20% phosphorus reduction, it is 2.64 pounds per year that we need to treat. In addition to that, we have channel protection, which is over 6,000 cubic feet that need to be stored on site as part of this. And we have a capacity of 10 years. So we're designing to the 10-year storm event. With some requests to make sure that we're looking at the 100-year storm event also for the culverts as we're tying into the existing manholes. And with the stormwater management that we submitted in the 60%, we're actually achieving more than what's required. We talked briefly about modular wetlands. We call these wetlands in a box. We're proposing these in 2 locations. There is a little bit of permeable pavement on site. We are focusing a little bit more on asphalt as the permeable pavement as opposed to concrete, although concrete still may be a possibility. And you can see here where the permeable pavement is here, and this is just the normal driveway. The bulk of our stormwater management is going to be treated by swales. And they are both level 1 and level 2 swales on the site that we are proposing. And you can see on this side right here the definition of the level 1 and the level 2 swales. The level 1 swale always has an underdrain underneath it. And the reason that we have the underdrain underneath it is because the soils in that area are being shown that they cannot infiltrate enough water, hence the underdrain. The level 2 we can install without the underdrain. And is what we do is a stone vault underneath it or a box of stone underneath it to be able to take that water on and then infiltrate that into the existing ground. And then once again, our planting right now, we're focusing on the meadowscape as part of this trailscape. And ultimately, there's a lot of reasons for this, but the power lines are the biggest reason. The power lines do require a certain distance from them for trees and the height and the maintenance of them. And with that, I will gladly answer any questions as well as my colleagues.
All right, well, thank you for the presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions here, but, overwhelmingly, when we heard this several years ago or a year and a half or so ago, I know the commission was very, very excited about this being chosen to be the section that is developed in this dual trail way. I think it's going to make a really big, significant difference to the city of Falls Church and make it a much more memorable location on this long network, this long trail. So I'm really excited that's coming to Falls Church, and the design looks like it's in really good shape. I think we'll have a few questions, as we were asked to, about the design and the noticing, et cetera. But it's a really exciting thing. This is what we call one of the great streets of our city here, and now it's going to be even greater. So it's a wonderful, wonderful development that's happening, and it looks like it'll be safer and more enjoyable for all the parties who are using it in the city. So do we have any questions that we want to address? We have 4 main things we've been asked about, but do we have any questions we want to ask about this design in particular? Yep.
I have a couple. First of all, in looking at the staff, first of all, great overall plan. Love it. It'll be great to have this here. And I completely appreciate the desire to keep it on budget, because that is a sure way to sink the whole idea. But I did have a couple questions that hopefully aren't too budget related. One is, in the staff comments, there's a question about the capacity of pipes that flow under the trail and whether or not they meet the current thing. And the response was, hey, that's not our deal, which I totally agree with. But presumably there will be coordination so we don't build a nice new separated trail and then a month later have the city come in and dig it up to replace some pipe. So I don't know who's responsible for that kind of coordination, but that has to, if we're going to be replacing any pipes, which I guess we're just starting up the task force to know what we'll do, but gosh, that would be frustrating. One of the clearly you guys have reacted to the question of why is there not a wider space between the two paths, and I think the explanation is pretty understandable. It would be expensive. There's not really room, all that other stuff. I do think our plan from like 2016 did have a larger space between the trails, so probably would have helped people if that had been addressed earlier on. But that's not my main question. My main question, there was a question about whether or not shrubs could be put in that 2-foot thing, and the answer was something about that 2-foot thing was a median for bikes that was required or something. Could you explain what the requirement is? And because to me, as a person who walks on this trail more than I ride my bike, my concern is, hey, my kid wanders over into the bike thing, and just having a flat thing that's clearly designed for bikes to go on it, a median for bikes is the explanation, doesn't give as much separation as a bush or a sign or a lamp post or something. And a bush is a pretty, not the worst thing to crash into if you're on a bike and you're in trouble, probably better than crashing into a person. So I'm curious what the requirements are there.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So to label a trail a multipurpose trail, it has to have certain things associated with it. One of the things that it has to have is that it is meeting a certain slope standard, for example. So if the cross slope across it is 3%, that's too much. It can't be that. So that's one of the standards that we have to meet. The longitudinal slope of it, there's a standard to it, and typically it's between maximum of 8%. But to meet the standard, there's also a shoulder requirement. And that shoulder requirement is a minimum of 2-foot separation between other items. And that is hence where 2 feet comes from, is that separation is required between the other objects. That gives enough space for somebody riding on their bike to be able to recover. So that's the intent. In addition to that, the stamped asphalt portion of it is also part of highly showing that this is a separation between the pedestrian side and the non-pedestrian side. If we put shrubs in it, it is no longer a recoverable space. And hence why we can't put vertical elements in that 2 foot.
How wide is the trail right now?
Right now, the actual pedestrian trail but the paved trail is 10 feet wide.
All right.
The pedestrian trail, the gravel pedestrian trail is between 6 and 8.
Okay,
varies.
so, but if the paved one is 10 feet wide, which, I mean, I understand that, I mean, I walk on that, so I didn't realize that was just for bikes, but, and this new one's 11 feet wide, can we make the new one 9 feet wide with a 2-foot shoulder and then 2 feet that can have shrubs in it and then people walking?
So the intent
Like
behind...
if this is already wider than what they have now, why do we need an additional shoulder?
The intent between having an 11-foot wide trail specifically is to allow bikes to be able to pass each other. So you can have one bike going one way, the other bike going the other way, and having enough space for a bicyclist to be able to pass those other 2 bikes. That allows more bicyclists to be able to use that corridor when it's at its peak.
In this recoverable space thing for the bikes, that's a requirement, that's a regulation?
It's an AASHTO requirement. Now, I will say that AASHTO is guidelines when it comes to bikes,
Yeah.
but there are federal requirements for what a multipurpose trail is, and those are the requirements that we typically follow.
And what do we get by calling this a basically, it's like, this seems like this awkward thing, like, hey, we're doing this to make it safer for pedestrians, presumably, and bicyclists, and yet we're doing it in a way that to me seems illogical. Like, put a couple shrubs in there that really makes it clear where the bike should be and where the people should be, and crash into a shrub's not the worst thing in the world if you're in some sort of emergency situation. But instead, we're going to say, no, let's make this completely bikeable so that when there's some sort of bike traffic jam, they can easily just drive over here into the shoulder to pass people on the wrong side. I'm just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it seems awkwardly backwards that the rules claim to make it safer, but in my mind, make it less safe, at least for the people on foot. But maybe I'm the only one who feels that way.
Well, I was going to ask, is the stamped concrete, is that like a rumble strip? I mean, if you were on that on a bike, would you physically feel it?
Oh, yeah, you would feel it.
Yeah.
I can go back to the image. Maybe I can go back to the image. You can see the depth of this groove right here, and it's not intended to catch something, and they are still ADA accessible, but it's deep enough that when you hit it, you would feel on a bike.
Right.
So anyway, I have that concern. I wish there were a way to put some stuff in that median to make sure everybody, both bicyclists and pedestrians, know, hey, let's not wander in here because that's where we're going to have accidents. And then my final comment was, notice, I assume everyone who backs onto the bike path is noticed by code, right? That they're within the 100 feet. So I think that's important because, as we talked about before, a lot of those people think that half of that space is their backyard when it's not. So have they already been noticed?
We haven't sent out the notification yet. Typically, we send it out, I think the requirement is 10 days before action. Obviously, we try to get it out sooner than that. But we typically don't send the notice out too soon, just because the plans haven't been finalized.
So I would say notice at least those people. We can't notice those people and then have it be an administrative approval, right? So we should notice, have a public meeting where we talk about it and people can come and talk. And then either we approve it or you guys approve it sometime later. But like, to me, then the idea that we might send a notice 10 days before you guys administratively approve it, that would be a mistake, I think.
In staff level conversations between city staff and Nova Park staff, we have talked about Nova Park standing up a website, posting physical signs on the trail. Depending on the coordination of that, I think the notice could drive people to the website to get questions and comments there. It could be helpful to have some of the direct dialogue with Nova Park staff.
I just think it's going to be less, it's going to be people who are like, wait, that's my backyard. They're not going to really care about the bike path plan. They're going to wonder, hey, when I bought this house, I thought that was part of my yard thing. So that's why it's almost like, it's almost
I think there needs to be
unrelated to this. It's like a PR thing that the city should be prepared to undertake. 'Cause
I mean, there needs to be a policy for those encroachments. I mean, there are a lot of encroachments that over decades, people have sort of, taken over or, planted things, done things in that right of way or in the Nova Parks property. But, so I guess is there a policy that the way you folks handle encroachments when you come across that? I mean, it's part of a construction project. I imagine it's not the first time here is not the first time where that occurs. It occurs all along the trail, so.
Sure, there are definitely encroachments, and this is an opportunity to address some of those.
Right.
I think our plan for notice was a combination of things, so that we would have signs on the trail, we would buy an ad in the newspaper, and we then have both the signs and the ad direct folks to a web page that could have, a lot more detail. Because it is, depending on what your interests are with this project, there's a whole bunch of different things you might be looking for.
Yeah, and my point is that some of the property owners probably do not actually go on the trail very often, so signs on the trail doesn't help them. But presumably they'll get something in the mail, like we're required by law to send them something in a letter in the mail, which, again, I think if we send that too close to some sort of a final approval, you're just going to end up with angry people. And not, you're the ones that have to take those calls. But I think, and I fully support, this is a public park, and I'm happy those people have had decades of use of it for their personal use. But I think one of the best things about this project is going to kind of remind everybody how big the park is and that we should all be able to use it. So I think that's great. I'm just trying to say we should anticipate some people are going to be upset to learn this. But those are my only comments. If we could put some shrubs in the middle, that'd be great. Overall, awesome plan. I hope it gets kept on track for the timing for the spring and everything like that. And, we got the new bridge coming. It's going to be a whole new day for this part of the trail.
Any other questions? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I too am very excited about this project, and maybe it's a good thing that the grant process is forcing to hit the accelerator as far as timetable. So I look forward to that. I too have the concern about the need for coordination between the city on the replacement of those inadequate stormwater pipes. We certainly got an awful lot of feedback from the February 8th storm about concern as to whether or not the dual trails would add to the stormwater problem. We certainly don't want to lose the opportunity while the construction is taking place and while the planning is taking place to take care of some of that inadequate stormwater infrastructure. So that's just a comment. Just wondering about, there was a comment about trees on the perimeter not being part of the scope of the project, which I understand. Would there be some opportunity there, maybe this is more for the city to plant trees where it's allowed, of course, or even the Village Preservation Society, which plants trees, so that we don't lose entirely the opportunity to put trees where it's possible to put them. Of course, I realize it's limited because of the power lines, but just wondering if that is an opportunity that we could pursue.
Yeah, there are certainly funds and opportunities and partnerships and volunteers that often become available to do tree plantings, and sometimes there is a search for land that can accept trees of different kinds.
Exactly.
Some of this would be related to, of course, as was mentioned, the easement that Dominion controls around the power lines for their protection. So that would impact, of course, the location of any plantings as well as the species selected. And right at a, we sort of know going into it, these aren't going to be oaks and maples. These are going to be smaller ornamental trees, or even what are sometimes referred to as large shrubs, but something that you can still get some height and maturity, but still stays out of the Dominion easement. And they have I think, a prescribed planting list.
Right.
I would also add that we have been in recent discussions with city staff about stormwater infrastructure that's, in and under the trail. So we're in coordination on that.
Good. Glad to hear that. You mentioned the possibly changing over from the concrete permeable asphalt to the asphalt permeable material. And I would strongly support that. I took a tour of the wharf, and they've used extensively the bike paths that they have there, the asphalt, and it seems to be working very well. And the developer for our Gateway project is also committed to using that same material. So it would seem that is the preferred way to go. And was I correct in understanding that it's only the pedestrian path that would have this, and that the existing bike path would just remain the same?
That's correct. And one of the issues is utility vehicles, because the permeable materials are not as structurally strong as regular asphalt. Whether we want it or not, we get a number of utility vehicles that need to use it as access to various things along the trail.
I understand. That's a good piece of information, so it'd be good to make that more widespread when people ask the inevitable, well, gee, you put it on one side, why not the other? So yeah, that's helpful. As far as the communications go, I attended the Founders Row outreach meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I was surprised that one person asked about the future plans for the WNOD, and no one from the Founders Row team seemed to be aware of it. So just some way to take that into account on the communications plan might be worthwhile.
Yeah, I will say that the Founders Row team is extremely knowledgeable about the Founders Row site. And of course, there have been conversations about how to handle the crossings. And I know various staff teams from various agencies and jurisdictions have been out there to make sure that element of the project gets coordinated. But certainly we can make them aware of the larger plan. And
Little hand-holding, since they actually do publicize what's going to happen there, and they're a good source of communication as well. That's all I have.
Ms. Teese?
Yeah, so I definitely think on the noticing process that we want to do as many types of noticing as we can. I would actually suggest maybe even, we have 3 bike shops local, perhaps even putting a notice in there, because they probably deal with a lot of people that go on the WNOD in this area. So I know one's just outside the city and there's 2 in the city, but that might be a good place to notice as well. And I definitely believe that we want to see these materials before any kind of administrative action, and we want to have some type of public meeting, because we have to give citizens a chance to comment on this before it goes forward at some point. And I agree with Mr. Stevens, if there's a chance to put in some shrubs and things, because part of it too is anything that kind of delineates the trail from the yard is helpful as well. Screening for both sides is helpful, I think. So if there's a chance to do something like that, that would be really great. There's a lot of invasives on the trail right now, so any construction you do is going to help that. So I'm excited to see some of those invasives lost. We actually didn't have porcelainberry in the city until it came off the trail. So anything we do there is helpful.
Any other comments, questions? So make sure, so I can make sure I understand, the bike trail portion is just standard asphalt. There's nothing unique about that. Then there's this stamped concrete for the divider, and then stamped asphalt, I'm sorry. And then the pedestrian portion, it's permeable, but does that look like the current walking trail now, like a gravel? Or I just don't know or is this a different type of asphalt? Or
So, and it's not the entire length of the pedestrian side. It's some portions really focused on testing the material, making sure that everybody feels comfortable with it. But it is permeable asphalt. So it's actually an asphalt material. It's just that the way that they put the binder in it and the size of the stone and the size of the fines that are in the material allow the water to actually infiltrate through the asphalt into the stone reservoir below.
I see. But so it doesn't have a loose feel underneath your feet in the same way?
That's correct. It would not, it still would be a hard surface similar to your experience of asphalt. I would say that it tends to be a little bit more gross in texture because those smaller fines that are typically in asphalt that is run-of-the-mill road asphalt give it a much finer, smoother surface. Permeable asphalt doesn't have as fine of a surface. It tends to, it has little voids basically on the top, and it just is, it's not as fine. You can't make it as smooth.
Sure. No, I just want to make sure I understood that it wasn't the loose gravel, so terrific. Me personally, I don't have a problem with the stamped asphalt, the 2-foot buffer. I'm a heavy user of the trail. It currently could be safer as it exists, but if I had 11 feet to maneuver, I think that's adequate. It looks from your sketches that it would be clearly marked as something different, and a shoulder, as it were, and clearly marked to a pedestrian to say this is a separation. Plus, I've been on numerous dual trails. I assume there's some marking on the trail itself that says this is for walking, this one's for biking. I feel like the users of the trail could figure this out without much difficulty, and appreciating that while wider would always be better, given the limits of disturbance on this project, it seems totally reasonable to me. So I know the staff has raised it, and it's been raised that this is, is this safe enough for the users? My own view is that what's been proposed looks to be safe, adequately safe, and is such a vast improvement over what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis that any slight improvement, whether it be bushes or brush or whatever, is just, maybe better, but not a reason in any way to sort of change the design and lose the momentum that this project has. I do think, though, as one of our great streets in the city, that in addition to proper notice requirements, I do think that it's appropriate that the public has a say in or an opportunity to voice their concerns or voice their questions and have a place and a forum for them to bring those comments to the Planning Commission and for us to have to take action on it. I think, overwhelmingly you have tremendous support here on the commission here. I do not expect it to slow things down, but I do want to hear the comments from the citizenry, and I think it's prudent for the Planning Commission to make time for that. And, my own view is that that does not look like it's going to slow you down. I appreciate that the administrative approval allows some more guarantee about your timeline. It's not lost on me what we're trying to accomplish here. But given its importance in the city and the radical change and the encroachments that are there, I feel it's a disservice to the community to try to do this through an administrative process, is my own view on that. And it sounds like that's being echoed here by the other commissioners. So that's my own view on that. In terms of the notice process, it sounds like all the things we talked about would be appropriate, certainly the letters and directing people to websites and giving them as much information as possible. Potentially that could limit the comments that come before us. And the bike shops is a fine, look, this is a big change. My view is for the better, a wonderful change. But I think that anything we can do to properly notify in terms of the timing, I think we should obviously adhere to as close to the 10 days as possible. And the stormwater management, others have commented on, as long as there's coordination, it sounds like that's important. So I'm good with the design. I think the noticing process, as we typically do, and then your other question about the administrative approval I just addressed. So I think those are the four. It sounds like we're generally in agreement here on the commission from what the comments I heard here. But look, I'm excited about it. It's wonderful. It's nothing but terrific, and it's going to make a big change for the Falls Church. If you'd like to, comment on what you're hearing, I'm happy to hear, your comments on it, and if we've addressed your concerns other than the administrative approval portion. You're welcome to speak on it.
We very much appreciate this opportunity, and whatever the Planning Commission would like to do in terms of public hearing, that sounds reasonable. Our main goal is timing and to stay on track. So, with any project, if you get the timing right and the budget stays on track, then we're good with that.
Yeah, no, I think we share that. It would be spectacular to have this up and running by July 2020. I mean, that's beyond my original expectation. It'd be amazing.
I'm glad it's beyond, because it's not going to happen in July 2020.
Where did I see the date? I'm sorry, I don't want to speak.
It may be started in July 2020, but it won't be completed till a few months later, so.
No, I was looking at the staff report when I said that date, so let me make sure I get
We're
end
planning.
of July of 2020 finished construction. That's what it says on the staff report. So if I got that wrong, it's
That may be a
wrong.
little optimistic. I think we're looking at June, July, start of construction and finish, probably a little more into the fall.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, it says, just to be clear, it says, I didn't make that up. It
Oh,
says
I know.
beginning construction in mid-April and end of July is it finished, so.
You said it exceeded your expectations, which is great, because it won't meet them.
If it's this. All right. Well, I appreciate the clarification.
We're like 2021.
That's right. You're way ahead of their expectations, honestly. That would be fantastic if you met my revised understanding, at least. Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't have any further comments, so I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, now to the 8 Selden Villa Ridge subdivision work session. I assume we're getting a staff report on this now, or
no,
is it the
actually-
same one we heard before about the continuing motion?
Well, I do not have anything beyond what I already shared during the public hearing portion. So the applicant has the alternate plan, and they have a PowerPoint presentation. We've received several public comments written, and we've placed those on the dais for you. A lot of the public comments have revolved around stormwater runoff, as we've heard from the public, members of the public today, and also tree preservation. The city arborist has graciously offered to attend a meeting if there are questions about tree preservation specific to that oak tree. Otherwise, I'll defer to the applicant, and I'm happy to take questions anytime during or after the presentation.
All right, thank you. The applicant may give us their presentation. It does not matter, is my understanding. There's a remote for,
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank
Yeah.
you for,
I'm sorry to interrupt you real quick. We have not received this presentation. I haven't seen this title page, that's why.
We don't have it, I don't think.
We didn't get this, right? This is all new.
No, I added this to our folder recently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't there at,
Yeah, I haven't seen it. So
Saturday.
normally I've seen these before so
okay.
you may have to explain it more
Sorry for
carefully.
that. Certainly, yes. So, my name, first of all, is Scott Schreffler. I'm a part of the development team representing Midville Development. Personally, I'm the builder on the project at Cottage Street Custom Homes. Thank you for meeting with us again this evening to walk through the issues on this particular project, as we had started last week, or last month, rather. Basically, the goal this evening would be to revisit the plan briefly, the original lot layout that we saw last month, as well as present the alternative so-called pipe stem version of this lot subdivision. So, and then, of course, seek comments and answer questions on that. So with that, I wanted to first of all just show the front elevation of the existing home at 807 Villa Ridge Avenue, along with the, of course, prominent tree that's in the front yard that we have noted and frankly designed the initial plan around preserving. That is a 42-inch white oak tree that is as you can see, very beautiful. Next slide is just, again, another image of the tree. And then to just reiterate the fact that in our original lot layout, as you will see in the next slide as well, and the slide after that, we, along with all of the other lot characteristics, including topography, orientations, adjacent buildings, and configured the lot such that we preserve this tree and also were essentially allowed to build or at least develop 2 building footprints that would accommodate that. And then this is an overview of the site in general and its location, if you're unfamiliar with where 807 Villa Ridge is. So here we are, again, revisiting the original configuration on the left. We have slightly modified it based on comments that we received on last meeting. This is a 2-lot subdivision. The lot in the rear has a 30-foot front lot line, slightly larger than 30 feet, actually. And you may or may not be able to see the lot sizes up there, but certainly well within the lot minimums. The comment that we addressed specifically, which is shown in the modified, I'll call it the modified original configuration, is that we have made the lots a little bit more uniform in its shape. So the front lot has an angled property line there. That actually also helps in our turning radius into the rear lot home that we are planning as well. But that's one comment that we addressed in essentially this proposed original configuration. And if I'm not mistaken, that really is the only modification to that original that we've done. The next slide.
I'm sorry, can you go back real quick?
Sure.
Just, where's the tree, the oak tree on this?
Yeah, so on this.
On the original configuration versus the modified, I guess?
So the tree is here. And of course, this is the preliminary subdivision plan. This on the right-hand side is the plat, so it's less those layers of data points. I will, in the next slide or the next slide after that, show you the revision and where that tree lands.
So the tree, where the tree lands, the tree is in the middle of the proposed building? Is that in original configuration?
No.
I'm misunderstanding.
So this is the outline of the proposed building. The tree is offset.
So that white portion next to the right of is just not actual structure?
Correct.
Okay, all right, I misunderstood it then. Okay.
We highlight, I'll show you in a slide here.
Okay,
We'll
sure.
see the difference here. So this just further explains some of the preservation methods of retaining this tree. So this is a schematic of the first floor plan of that home that you saw in the previous slide. The bubbled outline there is the tree. We have set the footprint of the home outside of the canopy of that tree. And in addition, we have, again, schematically designed a covered porch there that has a pier foundation rather than a full foundation to further avoid damaging the root structure of that tree. I just wanted to illustrate the length of design that we went through to further help preserve that tree. So here, this further explains the configuration from the original, and then of course today you're seeing for the first time this proposed what we're going to call this modified original, or in a minute the pipe stem version of this plan. So again, we're highlighting here where the white oak tree actually is. The original plan showed a 20-foot driveway. That was a comment that we addressed as well. We simply reduced that to 14 feet. There was no magical dimension there. We just we're illustrating a wider driveway for access to the rear lot. The concern there was just, the impervious area of a 20-foot wide driveway. So we've reduced it here to 14. And again, as I noted already, we've changed the property line between the two lots at an angle here versus a step configuration there. All right, so here's you're seeing, again, for the first time, this pipe stem configuration. The difference here, the main difference, of course, is that by code definition, this meets pipe stem in the sense that the lot line at the front of the property is less than 30 feet. And therefore, as a result, the setbacks on the rear lot are now mirroring the adjacent property at the front. So we have a 40-foot BRL noted at the front and a 40-foot rear BRL on the front lot. So as a result of that property line adjustment, the rear footprint of the rear lot footprint did not change, but the front lot footprint necessarily became wider as opposed to deeper. So the square footage that was lost at the rear of the property, we've essentially moved off to the side of the property. And again, as a result, you'll see in its relation to the white oak tree, it has come up against it, and most likely this configuration would result in losing that tree. The second image is the plat itself of this configuration. So this this really is for illustration purposes only. This is not a plan that we hoped or plan to do. I simply wanted to show that as a single lot redevelopment, this is what would be permitted by right, not exceeding the 25% building coverage nor the 35% impervious, approximately 7,500 square feet per floor, and a 22,000-foot house, which is what that is. So I don't think I need to say anything more. We're not doing this, but this is what could be built on this lot without public input, without planning commission input. So nobody wants this for sure.
Well, the market wouldn't build that, so, I mean, that's, to me, that's worthless to show us a picture like that. So, that doesn't prove anything. But what's the next?
I'm showing the maximum developable area of the lot.
Oh, I understand
That's
that.
just simply an illustration.
I understand that.
Yep. So moving on, we'll go to what the numbers show in the various conditions that we have. So first, in your first column there is the existing conditions. So we have approximately 3,130 square feet of building footprint with the existing home, with an impervious calculation of 5,543. And then the two versions that we have proposed, one being the original that you have seen, the new pipe stem version, you'll see the numbers there. The pipe stem configuration slightly increases the building coverage and slightly decreases the impervious nature, and that mainly has to do with the configuration of the driveways.
So basically what you're saying is that if it was redeveloped as a single lot, it's up to 7,600 square feet.
Correct.
But when you do two lots, you're going to be well over 8,000 square feet.
No, I'm giving you the total of the two lots.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. 'cause
Yes.
it-
Sorry. Good question. Yeah, so again, the 7,600 is the lot area times 25%. So we're over a 30,000 square foot lot to begin with. So in both cases, whether it's the original or the alternative configuration, we're significantly under the lot maximums. So stormwater management, of course, is, as you all know, normally and addressed at the time we're doing the grading plan. So, but of course, this is a major concern in the city, especially now. And so I wanted to take a moment to address stormwater management and what we, at least at this point in the planning, know and where we will take this, of course. So this is an illustration of the existing topography of the region surrounding the lot, where the water flows. So as you can see, most of the arrows are flowing immediately to the rear, with the exception of the one up front that does come off to the right onto lot, house number 809. So This is essentially the outline of what we are required to do in terms of stormwater management. Will naturally determine the existing water divides, where the water is currently flowing. We then will propose the buildings on the plan and develop a new grading pattern to work with those two houses. And of course, by regulation, we cannot increase the volume of water from those discharge points. They must be less than or equal than the existing. And then, of course, if the volume of water is increased, which we expect it to be, we will, of course, perform the soil studies to determine the infiltration rates of the soil and then begin designing the facility that best fits on this lot. Interestingly, this lot does fall within the 4 Mile Run watershed, which has an additional requirement of treating not only the 10-year rainfall event, but also the 100-year rainfall event. So in our engineering of the BMP on this site, we will, of course, necessarily take that into consideration. Some of the other concerns that have been voiced is tree preservation, and as I've noted already, the major goal in the initial proposal was to design a lot configuration that would preserve that tree that is such an asset to the property. We also, just in general, of course, hope to preserve as many trees as possible. It's an asset. I think everyone can agree with that, and we do as well. We have also heard of concerns about house location and line of sight issues, and the next slide I will go to now, since I've mentioned that. This shows the orientation of the two proposed footprints in comparison to the existing, and then its relation to the neighbors left and right. So in many ways, the neighbor to our right will now be looking out at what could theoretically be yard space, open green space, and same with the neighbor on the left, whereas today they appear to be looking into the side of the houses. So topography, of course, is a major consideration when we are laying out the new lots, and this rear left corner of this property has a very steep grade, and it would be very difficult to build on. We've been encouraged to consider flipping the development where the driveway would be on the left-hand side as opposed to the right, and it's without serious and significant engineering of walls and et cetera, it's almost impossible. Another concern, of course, is the prevention of off-lot damages. There's an existing retaining wall along the right-hand side of the property, and it is of brick construction today, and I'm not exactly sure of the age, but it's seeing some wear. It has some existing damages, and the neighbor to our right has expressed concerns there. We fully intend on having a third-party engineer do a pre-site inspection of that, or pre-construction inspection of the existing conditions, as well as a post, and naturally, should we incidentally cause any damages, we would be responsible for those. But the interesting data point on that is that the existing home is, I'll go to the next slide again, the existing home is 12.6 feet off of the property line, and approximately 14 feet off of that wall, where the new home will be set further away from the wall than the existing home, at 15 feet off the property line and approximately 16 and a half feet off of the wall. So, and we do, of course, don't want to damage this wall. We're going to we would intend on putting up super silt fence, and at the end of the project, of course, we would plant a landscape buffer along there that has also been suggested. I'm going to touch briefly on the sidewalk requirement. Just to note, most folks have, as you've heard tonight, have commented that they don't necessarily think this is an appropriate place to be putting a new sidewalk. One thing to bring up, and we're indifferent, we're happy to put it there. I personally don't think that a concrete sidewalk up against a curb where there is no landscape buffer is very aesthetically attractive, although usable, certainly. But one interesting thing to note is that we've calculated that we'll create approximately 735 square feet of impervious area that is not addressed on the grading plan because it is in the right-of-way. So that's certainly not a good thing. And as has already been noted too, that these are mandated with subdivisions only and not redevelopment of lots. So it's unlikely that there will be an opportunity to put many more sidewalks on this particular street, and that is not, of course, desired by most neighbors. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, address any additional concerns on either of these layouts.
All right, thank you. Do we have questions here? I assume we do. Anybody want to go first?
I guess I'm a little confused. I thought that the point of the work session was that there was an alternate proposal, but, I mean, so it sounds like what you're saying is not really. I mean, are you saying that you're indifferent to either proposal? I mean, it sounds like you have an opinion, but are you changing your proposal to this new proposal? Or?
Yeah, so based on the last work session and just the concern that we have found a loophole to avoid the setback of the rear lot. We were encouraged to develop a new plan. So, fact be known, we were not looking for a loophole. We did not find a loophole. We interpreted the code as written. We had staff approval of that understanding of the code, and we thought we were designing to code. And so, but that be said, we were encouraged to find an alternate plan that fit within the true definition of a pipe stem, which we were able to do as well. So as a result, though, unfortunately, the front lot, as I illustrated, the building footprint became shorter, if you will, shallower, and then necessarily wider to make up for the lost square footage of the building footprint that was available to us. So we are essentially indifferent to either plan. We are able to develop and build two homes of appropriate size, and so yes.
Can we put up the slide that illustrates this again?
Sure.
I'm not sure I have the full understanding of what's moved around. I know I don't. What's been reduced and what's expanded again?
On the original plan, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a lot line that is 30 feet in length in this location, and then we have a building restriction line at 30 feet on this rear lot at the front. And the reason being, because this would not be classified as a pipe stem lot by definition, then the standard R1A front yard setback of 30 feet would apply.
Yep.
So the concern was that this looks an awful lot like a pipe stem, and that we have found a loophole in the code to avoid the 40-foot setback that would otherwise be required with the pipe stem configuration.
With a pipe stem, the front yard would have to be the same setback as the backyard that it.
Yeah, so the way the
Dump
pipe
to.
stem code is set is that
Right.
the house behind
Yeah.
has a 40-foot front yard.
So with this next thing, what he'll show is he's got to move that lot line up, which squeezes that front house wider.
Changes
Now,
the
he doesn't
building envelope.
have to. He could change the configuration of the rear house. I mean, he's clearly designed this to show us that this will kill the tree, and so we shouldn't do this. But this is one way to do it. There are other ways to do it.
Just to comment on that, we would be open to modifying the footprint of the rear lot as well. But truth, if the dimensions are not shown in this shaded area, but you can see how shallow it is in comparison even to the front lot. It's 22-ish feet shallow, which is possible, but it would be very wide, very shallow.
I think this is why people are concerned about the overall plan, is that it barely fits.
Additionally, I have a question for staff. When we're looking at the diagrams that show the adjacent houses, where's averaging of yards coming into play? When it's a non-pipe stem, it should be averaged with the adjacent neighbor. Now, I recognize that that house may be back quite a bit, but it is supposed to be averaged within that 30 to 50 feet range. So why aren't we not averaging?
So the zoning administrator does not enforce that section of the code because his interpretation of it is averaging applies to required yards, not existing building locations.
You know, I have a signed agreement from the city that says that the city will average yards, that it was done in the past. Are you telling me my agreement with the city is no longer valid?
I haven't seen that agreement, but I would love to see
Well,
it.
I will give it to you. There was a very long case. A house across the street from me was not averaged properly. In fact, it had a curved yard, so the zone administrator drew a line across the curve and actually measured the setback from inside the street because he thought the curve was too hard to measure from. Anyway, the resulting was that the house was off by 12 feet and the house needed to be torn down. In lieu of having it torn down, we signed an agreement that said the zone administrator would average yards as appropriate. So if he is not following average yards, he is no longer following our agreement, which Mr. Shields signed, and that is a problem for me and for you.
Yeah.
I will send you the agreement. I have many, many copies.
Just for people that don't understand, can you clarify more what that yard averaging issue is?
So the city of Falls Church put in code about 50-some years ago about averaging of yards, saying that when you put a new house in, you look at the adjacent neighbors. In this case, it's only one because the other house is a corner lot.
Well, technically, it's a front
And
yard.
that the front yards are supposed to be a similar
Right.
length. Because if you allow houses to go back and forth, you get a jagged look. It was about protecting the view of the neighborhood to make it more of an undulating line rather than something that is jagged and unattractive. And so, like I said, the house across the street from me, a new house, it was a lot that had never been built on. It was a empty lot that had been there for 50 years. When it was built, the averaging was not applied correctly and also it wasn't measured correctly and it also wasn't applied correctly. And so the result of that action was rather than put the city in a position where they had to tear the house down and possibly get sued by the builder, we signed an agreement that saying averaging would happen from now on. Now, I've seen multiple places in the city where it's not happening correctly, and I have talked to the city about it, but I didn't realize we were totally abandoning it now. So, anyway.
Why does the zoning administrator say the lot averaging doesn't apply here? Because in R1A, it
He's
does
trying to say
apply.
it's no longer applying at all, I guess.
His interpretation, and he has an analysis of looking at the history and several code updates that led up to the point. His interpretation of that section of the code is that averaging applies to required yards, which is 30 for R1A and 25 for R1B. So 30/30 average of it is
That's not what the
30.
agreement says.
But
The
I-
agreement is based on the interpretation of code that happened for 50 decades before he came to the city. And that is not what the agreement says
I
at
still don't
all.
understand his interpretation. He's saying that
He's saying everyone has a 30-foot yard because your yard has to have at least 30 foot. And then he said that if your house is further back from that, it doesn't count. That's not yard.
It's building location versus required yard.
Right.
I think Ms. Dietz is referring to building location, averaging of
Correct.
building location, but he feels, I certainly would need to
What
look
section of
into
code is
that.
that again? What's the?
It's,
Yeah, I hate to put you on the spot.
yeah, I don't have to, I can look at it while you guys are chatting.
Yeah, you can look at it. I mean, the problem is we didn't get this presentation ahead of time. So if I had, I would have brought all the stuff with me or sent it to you guys.
yes, we are just.
But for a pipe stem lot, that does not apply, right? Lot averaging,
Well, that is not totally clear with me, but I don't think it does the way the pipe stem is laid out. I think but regardless, there is an agreement, and the agreement is based on the past interpretation, not his current interpretation. And it was signed by the city, and it was a legal document with lawyers and all that fun stuff, and, certified and everything. And otherwise, they owe me a house being torn down.
I'm not familiar with that history. I'm familiar with that part of the code. And Mr. Boyle has seen both concepts of this. Yeah. I mean, at some level, I think, given our existing code, I mean, I think, arguing whether or not that there's some way to subdivide these lots legally, I think I think we're going to be running around in circles. I mean, it seems apparent that whether we like it or not, I mean, there seems to be a way to subdivide it. I mean, we raised the issue about the pipe stem designation, although the way the code's currently written, I have a hard time saying that Mr. Boyle was entirely wrong to say that, because it's the way our code is pretty broad. I mean, the way it talks about, the 30-foot is the trigger point for what's a pipe stem, which is really interesting. I mean, that's kind of a side issue going forward, to look at changing our ordinance to be more reflective of lots that look like a pipe stem always being considered that way, whereas now, like the first proposal sure looked like a pipe stem, but it wasn't being treated that way. That's kind of a separate issue. That's not going to change what happens here, So I think, I think we need to look at, okay, if we're going to have two lots here, how can we deal with some of the negative effects that have been raised by the neighbors, and again, make it something that can be as cohesive with the neighborhood as possible, if, understanding that that's going to be difficult on this street, because there aren't any other pipe stems, at least on this section. I know there are some in this neighborhood. Although, again, as far as changing the ordinance, I mean, looking at the lot right next door, as other candidates that might, look to do something similar, I think it's something we should think about sooner than later, but that's another issue. So, I mean, I guess it's the point of the work session to give this applicant direction as far as the earlier concept or a different concept. I mean, it sounds like that. I don't know. I mean, there are pros and cons to both. I mean, yes, saving a mature, nice tree is good. I mean, I think Mr. Rankin is correct that he presented us with kind of a binary choice, this or that. There may be other options for as far as footprint and as far as the way exactly it's drawn, to try to still save the tree and still get you a decent footprint and maybe minimize impervious cover, go back to one where it's the shared driveway. I don't know. I mean, I think that's some of my concerns. I'd like to hear more about the proposals for stormwater management. I mean, I understand you have to meet Chest Bay, but as far as the precise way you're proposing to meet it, both your detention and your BMP, I mean, there's different ways to do it. I think, for the sake of the neighbors, to provide more detail on that, I think is going to be important. I think, I hear what the neighbors are saying. I think, but I think something that's important for everyone to keep in mind, especially for the neighborhood, is that a subdivision yes, the planning commission is voting on approving the subdivision, but the subdivision is in some ways a quasi-administrative process. It's not a rezoning. It's not a special exception. And so our ability as a commission, this is more for the neighbors to understand, that our ability as a commission to outright, deny a subdivision when somebody meets the minimum area with setback requirements, is very difficult, and we're very limited. And it actually puts the city at liability to ignore what our ordinance says is the by right, someone has a right to do. We have a framework within which we work for a subdivision. And so I think that's something to keep in mind going forward, is that, I think, we really have to look at working with how can we make this subdivision as the best it can be. But I don't think we're going to be, arguing about one lot versus two here. So I think given that, as much as I don't like our current our current pipe stem definition, I mean, having the in some ways from a design perspective, I think it's better to have the houses, the front house not blocking the view of the rear house. I mean, I think having each house have some presence on the street is slightly better. I mean, it's going to change the character, but either way. But I think it's what I always don't like about pipe stems is, again, the fact that you have the home in the back that's completely hidden, that's staring at the rear. It kind of hurts the value of both lots. Offsetting them is is preferable, in my opinion, from a design perspective. All things being equal, I think we still have to, again, deal with some of these other issues, these more, the engineering issues, to make sure that this can be done in a way that's not going to cause undue harm to some of these surrounding properties. But from a design perspective, I think having them offset like that is better. I mean, it's still not ideal, but it's better.
Yeah. My feeling is, I don't, other than sellers and developers and maybe the people who live there, nobody likes pipe stem houses. But years ago, the code was written to permit them under certain conditions, presumably for reasons, probably reasons of, hey, I own this land, it has some value if I can do this thing to it. So for me, unless we change the code, I mean, this is why zoning exists. And last time I said, hey, this looks like a pipe stem lot, but you're not treating it like a pipe stem lot. And my question was, if it were a pipe stem lot, what would be the different requirements? And it seems like the main difference would be that you'd need a larger front yard setback on the rear lot, which they, drew up a version of that, sort of saying, hey, we can do it as a pipe stem lot. So to me, the beef is with the code that allows pipe stem lots. We've faced these a lot, and we've learned over the years there's not a lot we can do. I do think that the city is, people have come more and more lately to complain about the stormwater situation in the city, which I think we all feel similarly about, and it's been ignored, and we haven't invested in it, and we don't get to spend the money. We just get to give advice. So to the extent that this can be somehow an instigation to help the stormwater situation over there, I think that'd be great. I don't know how it necessarily works, other than just public pressure on city council to work that into our future plans and CIP and stuff. But I think Mr. Krauser's right. I don't think, at the end of the day, the code is the code. They could do this as a pipe stem lot. They have the land and the spacing to do it. They could do it the way they originally proposed. I don't know that there's much that we can do to prevent it, even though I completely understand the concerns of the neighbors. If I were a neighbor, I would be like, oh, this stinks. But it happens throughout the city. The house next door will someday be a pipe stem lot. Seems pretty clear. I do think that the tree, I love the tree. Are you guys willing to put your money where your mouth is and somehow make a commitment to keep the tree under the other plan? To me, we designate it as a specimen tree.
No, certainly. We in the last work session, that was what we came in with. We recognized the asset, the value of that tree on this property, and I agree. It would be a shame to have to remove that tree. We would not want to do that.
Yeah, well, and I guess my point is, and I'm not suggesting that this is a ploy, but I think we can all say it would be a shame to have to remove that tree, start building the houses, and be like, the tree's not going to make it. It happens all the time. So to me, I don't think there's any way that we could require you to have some sort of binding commitment to keep the tree. But
Yeah.
I guess my point is, I want the tree to survive. I'm not so sure the tree will survive under either plan. So to me, if the plan where the tree definitely won't survive is way better for other reasons, we should be willing to consider that, because I think there's a decent chance that either plan will be the demise of the tree. But, I think, so I guess I found myself, having read the stuff I had and hearing your presentation, yeah, I'm with Brett. I don't know which would be better. I think they're both essentially the same. They're both pipe stem lots. It's not with the character of the neighborhood. There's not a lot we can do about that. I know some of the public comment referenced some parts of the code about all that stuff. I think a lot of that was related to site plan, not subdivision. We could get guidance on that, but that's not even under consideration when we're looking at subdivision. And then site plans for residential redevelopment is a whole other beast. But I think, I don't know. I hope that the stormwater can be dealt with and improved upon the current thing. I think the city is woefully behind on all that and needs to get their act together. I assume that will be a big part of our CIP discussions this year, which I encourage people to come participate in. People don't usually participate in, but that's where if we're gonna spend real money on stormwater, that's where it will start. And then I had one final thought, which I'm looking for my notes. Oh, the sidewalk. I always think getting a sidewalk when you can makes sense because someday we'll be like, oh, I wish we could get a sidewalk there. I will say in past subdivisions where I've pushed for it and we've declined to do it, there was definitely more of a network nearby. There aren't any sidewalks anywhere near here. So I'm less compelled to push for a sidewalk here than in other places. But I do think we have to be careful about that because oftentimes when we see subdivisions, you know, a few of the neighbors don't want the sidewalk and we miss an opportunity. I think like up by your house, I think we missed an opportunity.
Sycamore Street.
Yeah, so, but this one, of all the places we've looked at, I couldn't find a sidewalk anywhere nearby this one, so. Those are my comments.
Yeah.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Mr. Scheffler, you mentioned that if the driveway were on the left side, that it would require a lot of engineering to be able to enable that. Just wondering if you had a rough guess as to what it would cost to enable a driveway on that side.
No, I honestly, it's the gradient drops off so rapidly. Within a short distance, it's dropping 10, 15 feet, maybe 20 feet. And so it really was not, it was a non-starter from the beginning. And also just with the existing water flow in that area, it would, a home there would essentially be a block for the existing water flow. So
it would be the stormwater treatment?
Well, could potentially cause a lot of other issues. I will say, in redeveloping this lot, we have the opportunity to regrade the property so that it will support more infiltration on site. If you were to look at the driveway as it exists today on the left-hand side, it is like a funnel, and it shoots off onto the neighbor's yard, Mrs. Black's onto the left, which they've commented on numerous times to us. And so we have the opportunity to correct that. By placing a home up in the front left-hand corner, you're essentially removing that impervious area from that specific location where there is the most grade, and you're transferring it to the opposite side. And then we have the opportunity to treat that water that comes off of that area. So in some ways, without it being redeveloped, you wouldn't have that opportunity, of course. But
right. Yeah, I'll be very interested in the city's, maybe some more analysis of remediation of stormwater issues. Realize you don't get into that specifically until the grading plan, but it'd be good to have some kind of an assessment as to what improvements could be anticipated as a result of the development that's being proposed. Also, since we have the benefit of the city's arborist, Ms. Reich here, I was just wondering if she would be willing to give us an assessment of the current health of that white oak tree.
The short answer is no. So a visual assessment, the urban forester and I went and we did a visual assessment, and the tree looks absolutely flawless. But we did not poke around in the soil, we didn't climb it. So before we would want to make any requirement that the tree be preserved, we would want to know for sure that there wasn't something going on that we hadn't seen yet. So visually, the tree is perfect, a wonderful example to save. Mr. Schreffler met with us last summer to see if we thought it was worthwhile to try to develop around it, and both of us said yes, absolutely, but with the caveat that it does need an arborist. He needs to hire an arborist to assess it, and until he knows he can preserve it, he's not going to pay for that done. So it's all kind of tied in together. It has to proceed together. We don't know yet.
Do you have an opinion on, and thank you for that, I was only anticipating you would have a visual assessment. I'm just wondering if you had any early thoughts on the various layouts that we saw tonight from the tree's perspective as to which one would give us the best opportunity to preserve that tree.
Oh, well, absolutely. It's the one that's not the true pipestone, because, well, when I talked with Akita, when I talked with staff, and when I talked with Mr. Schreffler, if that lot line comes forward, then the front house has to be, as Scott said, less deep, So unless he wants to build a much smaller than usual house, it would have to go towards the tree. So I guess his alternative would be to build a smaller house, but that's, I don't think the city can tell him he has to do that.
Okay, well, thank you. I don't know if any, my colleagues had any questions of you or not. I guess not. So the only other thought that I had was the sidewalk, any guidance that staff could provide. Like I said, we kind of went through this with the Sycamore Street, where it just seemed like there was no near-term prospects for continuing the sidewalk that would be placed in front of there. So it's kind of difficult to not see the neighbor's perspective when there's no plan to do anything other than just have that one stretch of sidewalk. So any guidance that you could provide would be very helpful as far as plans down the road, opportunities, thoughts, and so forth.
As you said, there's no existing plan in the city's capital improvement program to construct a sidewalk along Villa Ridge Road. As was mentioned here tonight, the intent of that provision in the subdivision code is to build sidewalks as land is developing. There have been opportunities where neighbors come back after the fact. They could be new neighbors to the area after construction has occurred, and the opportunity has since passed to try and build a sidewalk, and then, of course, it's very difficult. It's interesting, this conversation often goes back and forth, that when there haven't been any applications in a while, people will start talking and saying, you know, we should get sidewalks when we can. And then when there's an actual application in front of folks, I think the conversation changes and says, well, you know, there's this specific reason why it doesn't quite work out in this case. And so I think what staff has done in this case, I think, is the right thing to do, which is to stay to the city code, which calls for construction of sidewalks in subdivisions, and put that forward in front of the Planning Commission. And then there's a conversation with the community about what is appropriate in this particular application.
Thank you.
That was a very diplomatic answer, Mr. Stein.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other words, yes.
I have that section, thanks to Sheena here.
There we go.
I'll just read it out loud. Sure. I think it's because I'm short that I can't really. All right, it's under Section 48-1102, additional requirements, exceptions, and modifications. C, front yards. In AR district, the minimum front yard for new construction, new buildings, and new additions to existing residential structures, except for corner lots in R1A and R1B districts, shall be the average of the nearest front yards on either side, or if there be a building on one side only, then it shall be the same as the front yard for that building, provided no front yard shall be less than 30 feet in R1A district and 25 feet in R1B district, and that no front yard need be more than 50 feet.
Right.
Sounds like it should match the next door neighbor.
Well, that's what it, typically, that's how it was done in the city for a long time. It's why we don't have a lot of odd, jagged places. Anyway, I sent the copy of the settlement to you and Mr. Stoddard and to Ms. Basmore, and they can send a copy to the Planning Commission if you guys like to see it.
Sure.
Thank you. I think we.
But I'm starting to believe it's no longer worth anything, but that's life. Maybe I'll just blow the house up.
So you're saying even though it's called a yard, I mean, it's referencing, I mean, it's confusing because yards are defined
Yeah.
in the definition section.
Yeah, and it says where you cannot build above grade. That's what the definition of yard is, and my understanding from the zoning administrator, there used to be a time when building location was defined, but those sections were updated and removed, but this was a residue of that previous
The
code.
language is mismatched, it doesn't.
Right,
yeah.
right, and
I mean,
we run into that in other parts of the code, too.
I mean, I think this example with the pipe stem is, again, where we updated all that pipe stem language, but no one thought to look at the definitions.
Right.
But I think the problem with that is when these updates happen, the zoning staff is part of that update. And I think it's a shame that we're having updates where the staff is not actually looking at all the effects, so that we're not publicly looking at it. So we made changes that affected average of yards, at least in the interpretation of our current zoning administrator. But why wasn't that dealt with when we were changing language? Why didn't we discuss it then? So these things are happening without any kind of public discussion. And I think the Pipestone is an example of that, because we should have, that definition should have been looked at if it was going to affect the ability to use the Pipestone language in the future. And so to be clear, I mean, I think it was a failure in staff not to look at all those different things at that time.
Just so I can totally understand, so the zoning administrator is saying that that house next door, which clearly has a front yard much more than 40 feet, he's saying that technically that guy could build stuff right up to 40 feet, and then he would have a front yard that is 40 feet. So you guys can build a house with just a 40-foot front yard because that's what it could be next door, not what it is.
What he's saying is the potential is that it could have a 30-foot front yard, so therefore the house could be much, much bigger, I guess. But, I mean, if you look at that lot, that is a very long lot. So it has a lot of potential to build a lot more on it, really. But, yeah, so that's what's happening, is he's trying to say that it doesn't matter where the house is anymore, it matters where the building envelope is. Yeah, and that wasn't how it was handled in the past. And it wasn't, the intent of averaging yards is very clear in the minutes of that time period.
Well, and I mean, honestly, there's no point in averaging the building envelope because there's no visual, I mean, you just have minimum yard. I mean, so to me, the only point to have an average is to have it relate to the actual building.
Right,
Logically, so.
When that code was put in.
The code may be wrecked, but it clearly isn't doing what it was intended to do.
Well, it was put in after a certain amount of houses had been built in the city, but new lots were starting to be built on, and they didn't want to have, well, Lincoln's a good example where a lot of houses were really far back. And so they wanted to have that not happen. They wanted people to try to have a more attractive visual along the street by having it more, like if two houses were off a little bit and you put one in the middle, it would undulate rather than be jagged. And so that was the intent of the code, and I think the intent is still valid. And I think that when you see houses in the city that they're no longer following averaging yards, it is discordant. It doesn't preserve the neighborhood or the way the neighborhoods look. And I think it's a shame that we could go through all of that. I mean, that was 6 months of a very intensive stuff. We were in the court system ready to have the house go down where we said, sure, we'll sign an agreement. And now they're saying our agreement doesn't mean anything.
I mean, I'm not suggesting anyone necessarily do this, but I mean, if someone disagrees with how Mr. Boyle is interpreting the code, Mr. Boyle can be appealed. That's why we have a Board of Zoning Appeals. Any aggrieved party can appeal the zoning administrator's determination to the BZA. So, I mean.
Yeah, and the challenge is like anything else that
I don't know.
if you enforce that, it seems like it's saying the most have to be is 50 feet, so 10 feet back. Which again, you could do, just makes the house shape weirder. So this is the problem, right, is like, you know, do you encourage, there is a way for them to put two houses on this lot.
Well, I think.
And the question is, do we sort of encourage them to do something that is by the book, by the code, that ends up with weird houses? Or do we encourage them to do the best that can fit on that based on common sense?
Well, every time we chip at code because we think this might be better anyway, so let's not follow the code.
No, that's fine.
It's a problem for us as a city.
Yeah,
Because the code is there for a reason.
But if the lot averaging would negate the ability to have two lots, I mean, I think.
Yeah, it would, exactly.
But then I think.
But I don't think it would. It would just make the lots weird.
And then I think.
No, I don't think you could put the other house in there. I think you'd have.
I think you could technically split this lot down the middle and build two really skinny longhouses like they do in Arlington.
They don't have enough frontage.
What frontage do you need?
At the street, there wasn't enough frontage because they looked at
75.
that.
Well, you could do a skinny one. You could certainly do a regular pipe stem with some pretty skinny houses. I'm sure there is a way, even if you forced it.
And if lot averaging would negate the use, then they could ask for a variance from that. Because honestly, I think you'd have an argument that if they have.
And I would be good with that. If people want to negate the code and they go to the BZA and the BZA gives them a variance, then I celebrate that.
Yeah, no,
because the system has worked. What I don't like is when we're basically de facto giving variances without the system.
That's a valid point, and I can't speak to that.
And if I was on the BZA, I would have a problem with some of these things that happen.
But
because they're negating the BZA.
Yeah, and so this is a good question for staff maybe, or for an attorney. If we say, hey, you know what, we think that needs to have a 50-foot front yard because it's averaging, because we interpret this differently. is that within our purview, or they just say, hey, the zoning administrator said it's fine? You know what I mean? Like, are we, like, I get that as a citizen, I could go appeal the zoning administrator, but as the planning commission, can we make zoning
We
assessments?
can, and we have
then-
two Virginia Supreme Court decisions that show that when the Planning Commission did not agree with the opinion of the zoning administrator, they were allowed to make a different determination, and it went to the Virginia Supreme Court, both cases, and we won both. And it was very clearly, I sent a very clear quote from the court system that the Planning Commission has that right if they don't agree with the determination. So, yes, actually we do. But the thing with subdivision, you have to have a valid, real reason to do it, to not go forward with a subdivision. And I think for me, it may be, I mean, I think average in a yard should apply. So therefore, that would be a valid reason not to agree with this subdivision.
Well, and I guess the other question, sorry, this is probably my last question, maybe not. Does the subdivision require them to identify the building, the potential building? Or is that just sort of like, hey, that helps us see? Because you could build a smaller house on there 10 feet farther back. That'd be within code, right? You could build a small little house. There's no requirement that the house be a size. So I'm just trying to figure out where, if we were going to say, hey, this does not fit code, how can we do that necessarily?
I'm not sure if we can require them to show us the house design this early in the stage in subdivision. There's nothing in the subdivision code that would require them to give us the house design details, but there is something that asks,
building
there is
envelope?
something that talks about the house orientation and the front door.
Okay.
Based on that, we've asked applicants in the past to show us a footprint of the house, but beyond that,
And that, is the building envelope required part of the subdivision? Like documentation? I guess what I'm saying,
buil-
if he says,
yeah.
oh, yeah, sure, we'll build a house 10 feet shorter.
the building restriction line is part of the subdivision because the subdivision has to
Okay.
comply with zoning codes and it
All right,
talks
so then
about
we would
setbacks.
subdivide it, it would have to show that back, and then if they wanted to build it up
But
to
not the
4
footprint. The footprint, we're not approving the footprint.
We're not approving the
Right,
footprint.
but
We're up-
I'm saying he couldn't then, they couldn't later come back and then build it 10 feet forward because the subdivision would say, nope, you've got to, we subdivided with this building line 50 feet from the street.
You know, I have to look at it again, but I think they could change the footprint of the house that they showed during a subdivision. They can't change the restriction lines
Right.
because setbacks are
Yeah, yeah.
setbacks, but
That's
within that, I
Yeah,
think they
we're
can
just
change the
approving a
footprint.
lot. I mean, a subdivision just creates a lot.
Division
and
of
the
the
lot is
land, yeah.
subject to the ordinance, and then it becomes by right.
So even if we do the non-pipe stem version that shows the tree being protected, they could come back and change the house so that the tree is no longer protected.
Right, I'm saying if we say, hey, you have to have a 50-foot front yard because of lot averaging, and they drew that building restriction line 50 feet, they can't later, they'd have to come back and have that redone through us to build it closer.
Well, they'd have to go to BZA, though.
Or BZA.
They'd have to get a variance,
Well,
I think.
the
so.
subdivision,
If the subdivision showed a 50-foot front yard,
unless we got it as like a deed restriction, recorded with the subdivision plat, on the plat, like a note on the plat to say that.
they could just go to the zoning administrator, hey, we think it's 40 feet after it's
I mean,
passed
well,
us.
unless we were specific, the lot just creates the lot. And then once the lot is created, you can build on it.
Well, that's why I was wondering if
Subject
the
to
building restriction line is
Right.
part of the
BR,
subdivision.
well, it's the same term, we're using different terms for the same thing, a BRL or a zoning setback, same thing. So, as far as how it's typically drawn,
This is very educational.
yeah, so.
Something that may be helpful is just to reach out to the city attorney before the planning commission's next meeting and just get some clarification on can the planning commission and to what extent can the planning commission exert control over building setback lines, building restriction lines as part of a subdivision.
Right, like, can we say, hey, we think it has to be 50 feet, that's how we interpret code?
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, like with the most recent case, that determination was based on historic house code and stuff like that, so.
And no offense, but I would love to hear all this from the city attorney, not
Yeah,
just
no,
from
no,
you.
no, I'm just saying, like, it has, you know, the reasoning on that other decision was totally different than
Sure,
this.
sure. Yeah. Because I personally, I'm not an architect, but I think even, they could probably come up with 2 lots with a 50-foot front yard. So I don't know that we're getting to the point where they go, well, can't do it. They're just going to do it more convoluted, which I agree, I'm with you. I think we should enforce the code as written. so I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I don't think, doesn't seem like we have found some sort of secret key to making this impossible. Just seems like there's enough land and enough setback that they could draw it in a way that will eventually meet all the requirements. At least it's a rectangular lot. I mean, come on. Some of them are crazy. You know?
The other one.
All right. I'm not sure we've given that as much guidance as you'd like. We have a lot of argument going on. I have nothing to add to this, this debate. I mean, my own view is I'd like to save the tree. I mean, this is on the common sense level, not the debate we're having about zoning and code. Is I'd like to see this tree saved, and while I am a huge proponent of sidewalks, in this instance, I think it makes sense to, common sense says to waive it. The neighborhood doesn't want it. There doesn't seem to be any real connections within any close proximity. It's, as we've said before, like a sidewalk to nowhere. People walk for 50 feet or 70 feet across the sidewalk, and it doesn't do any good for this neighborhood. Though, as we've said before, that's a decision to make very carefully, and so it's not, there could be stronger opinions here on the sidewalk. My own view is that it doesn't add anything to this neighborhood, while the tree preservation does. That while you're going to be disturbing this land and changing the nature of this lot, to have a tree like you have there currently will add some continuity and some coverage and give more the impression of something that can recover ecologically than if we just completely removed it. So I appreciate all the legal arguments. We certainly have strong opinions here, and happy to delve into them even more as we go forward in terms of its official pipe stem or not, whether it's 50 feet or averaged. So on those two simple issues, that's my view. But I'm not sure we've given any real guidance onto how to handle the pipe stem versus the setbacks. There seems to be some real debate here. And it sounds like we need to get some more information from a city attorney, and we need to do a little bit more work on our part to understand it. If there is another solution where we can accommodate these, where we can create something that meets the code more accurately, I think that's also something maybe you could look at for us.
Sure.
Right now, as I think Mr. Krasner said, we have a binary choice.
Yeah.
And I think there are other options. I have not done the measurements, obviously, have not done the design, but I think the overarching concept is we understand, as a commission at least, that these type of subdivisions are allowed, and it needs to meet the code, and you have some significant leeway in terms of how big the houses are, and I appreciate that the two houses here are a lot less square footage than could possibly be done by a large single build, but we're also trying to be responsive to the tree that's there and also the code. So we have a lot of conflicting elements here, but ultimately, given your by right. Your rights under by right, it would be better for this project if we can accommodate some of the requests that have been made here by the commission. But we need to look on our end in terms of what we can and cannot limit. There seems to be some real debate, some real legal debate about that.
So, if I may, as we move forward, hearing all of that, the intention behind developing the second alternative pipe stem plan was the fear that y'all would not approve the previous one due to that, loophole or that workaround. So, ironically and unfortunately, Plan B kind of forced us into a wider footprint of a home, which interferes with that tree, as we've decided. So, we would like both, really. We would love to save the tree, but not fear the rejection of an approval. So I think, if I'm not correct, the hinge pin here is on the definition of pipe stem and what you all would agree that is.
I think that's part of it. I think there's this issue about the averaging in terms of, I mean, I'm just looking at the picture you have up there.
Yeah.
It does not, my understanding of the way what was just read is that the house on the right doesn't have any bearing on this because it's a corner, but it's really the lot on the left. And it's clear that that's not averaged in the way that some of the commissioners understand it.
I think the lot averaging is, that's the key question. I mean, for me, it may be a loophole, but you didn't create that loophole, so I don't think, maybe personally, I can't hold you responsible for that. I mean, I think you are working with the code that as it's written. I think the code is written poorly. That's a different issue for a different day. So, but I don't think that interpretation by our zoning administrator was, in my opinion, was incorrect. I think it's written as just, it's 30 feet or it's not, and it's just, it is or it isn't. So, I'll put that aside. I think the lot averaging issue that was raised tonight, I think for me, that's the one question I would like to hear more about from our city attorney, from our zoning administrator perhaps, at least from our city attorney. I mean, I'd like to get the city attorney's opinion on that issue. So,
And if I may, I'm not aware precisely, but I would assume that there are numerous recent pipe stem approvals that did not take into consideration at lot averages.
Right, well, that's the.
I think that's one of the challenges is I think the plan you want isn't a pipe stem. So I think you would struggle to go through with a non-pipe stem solution, but then argue that you're going to not do the front
Right,
yard averaging because it's a pipe stem.
That's the issue, right. So ironically, because the first plan is not a pipe stem, so the pipe stem rules kind of aren't.
Then the averaging may apply.
Right, so that's the question. Does the averaging then apply because it's not a pipe stem? And I got to reread that part of the code myself to refamiliarize myself with that, how that interplay between pipe stems and the lot averaging and how that's been applied. I mean, we have to look at how that's been applied in other recent approvals. So to me, that's the question that I think for staff, to what extent does lot averaging come into play here or not when it's not a pipe stem? Because the original proposal, it's not a pipe, it looks like it, and that's an issue for another day as far as fixing that problem. It's not. We can call it that, but it's not under our code. It's two lots that happen to be, one wraps around the other, but it's not a pipe stem. And then in that event, what happens with lot averaging? Then you have two regular interior lots configured such, and what does that mean for their setbacks off the street? So.
We were able, as a comment, to find numerous other lot configurations that were greater than 30 feet, but less than, say, 40 feet. And there are numerous examples of that throughout the city, more so on cul-de-sacs, for example.
Right.
Or on a turn of a street might have a narrow lot line at the front at 35 feet, but it widens out to 150 feet. So.
Well, part of it is that the code for pipe stems changed a few years back, and so there's the pre-ones and the post of that code change.
Yeah.
And that 40 feet front yard came at that change.
I see, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why you're seeing that. And there was a few really egregious pipe stems that were like odd, like one with catty corner to the houses around it, and there was a code change at that time, and that was part of what happened.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna see them all meet the current code.
Yeah, and I want to leave you all with the message, like we acknowledge the issues with the pipe stem, even what you're saying, but in our design, we have staggered these in such a way that the road frontage, as you look at them, in a sense, though it is a pipe stem, the design intent is to make it look very much not like a pipe stem, preserving the large tree, having each of the front facing the road frontage, and essentially preserving the green space up front. And I hope that will obtain that goal, but that was the design intent.
Yeah, no, I think that's been made clear, but.
Okay.
So thank you. Any other questions? This is just a work session. We're not having any, final.
Sure, yep.
But it sounds like we have a little bit of work to do here, certainly on our end and perhaps on yours.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, witching hour.
It is 10:25. We want to head this off at the pass and get a motion to extend the meeting beyond 10:30?
I'll vote for 15 minutes. How quick can we be on Greenway Downs and planning director, or no, planning?
The annual report is no minutes, I mean, a few, very, very few minutes. The Greenway Downs, I think we're just giving guidance. I mean, we can
Right,
talk about it here.
It's our second work session, because we already had.
I would say it's closer to our 25th work
Well,
session.
I mean, of this, yeah, of the current, of the current reincarnation.
Now, why don't I move that we extend our meeting at 10:45, then we're out of here?
All right, I'll vote for that.
Okay, so that's a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Okay, let's move.
All right, we want to cover this quickly, if that was not clear.
The clock is ticking.
Understood. I'm going to turn this over to the staff planner on this, Shana Schaefer, as soon as I can do a brief introduction, which is to say, this is the Planning Commission's second work session on this iteration of the Greenway Downs update. And the hope for tonight is to show planning staff's responses to the Planning Commission's feedback at the most recent work session, with the hope that this is in a form that the Planning Commission finds acceptable for getting to a work session with council.
Okay, great.
Right, so as mentioned, this is the second work session. The first one that was held was November 4th, 2019, and so a summary from that work session begins in lines 23 of the staff report, and then beginning in lines 29, it highlights changes that have been made to the proposed code amendment since that work session. One of those being in how building lot coverage is handled. In the last iteration of the ordinance, it was proposed that building lot coverage could be increased to 30%, so that would be a 5% increase from what would be permitted currently under R1B. So the change here is to keep the principal building at 25% and then allow additional 5% if someone wanted to do a detached garage, perhaps in the back of their house. And then if you were doing an addition, you could go up to 30%. And so again, this is to encourage people to do additions to existing structures rather than new construction. The other change that was made is that for accessory building setbacks, staff looked at this again and changed the setbacks from 3 feet to 5 feet for fire safety purposes. And then covered porches, taking a look at how the allowance for permitted encroachments into the front yard were handled. This was specifying that a minimum porch size of 50% of the first floor street facade would be allowed that permitted encroachment, and this has been changed to a minimum 60 square foot porch, and so that would allow a little bit more flexibility in design. So those are the main changes, but happy to answer any questions and listen to feedback from the commission.
I was not part of this, I was absent on this meeting, but I have been very involved with Greenway Downs over the past 12 years of being on the Planning Commission. These, let me just ask, are these consistent with the discussion, and or do people have issues with these three different changes? They look reasonable to me.
I think it's good. I think, last time we talked about this, one of my concerns was we were reducing the permitted height from 35 feet to 28 feet, which I think is fine, but I was worried.
It's based on like formula, right? I mean,
Well, that's the thing, this is the clarification that helps a lot, because what I was worried is like, hey, I own a house there, you guys are gonna suddenly make it so I can't build as big a house. But what I didn't realize, because I am not as smart as you guys, is that the 35-foot limit was basically not reachable, because the actual limit is a ratio of lot size, and most of these lots are small, so that basically 29 feet was as tall as you're going to build it anyway. So that isn't it, because I was worried that we don't want to at the last minute have somebody come out and be like, I hate this because it's going to make my
Plus, we changed it to 30 feet anyway, right?
property less valuable. Right. But if we're actually giving them an extra foot, and so then you'll minimize that. So that's a good clarification. That makes me feel better. And then I think it's very smart, this lot coverage, allowing the extra 5% for that detached garage, because we don't want new buildings that have big giant garages right out front. That's ugly. But also letting an existing structure go to 30%, because what we're trying to do is encourage people to not tear down. So I think the changes are great. I sure hope we're not having some unintended consequence, but
No, I
overall,
think
I
the
thought they
changes-
covered our concerns nicely.
Yeah, I echo that. No, I agree. I
Yeah,
mean, I think I
they're
raised a
good.
concern about being afraid about encouraging tear downs and focusing more on encouraging people to do additions and giving relief for existing homeowners there and helping the existing, to maintain the existing character. So yeah, I think actually the changes were pretty good. And I think it's an interesting way to do it. But I think it does address, it addresses my concerns.
Yeah, so I think thumbs up. And then my other comment was, before we go and organize a big community meeting, let's make sure city council's ready to take it up afterwards, otherwise we'll do all that and they'll sit
Well, I
around
think
for
that
2 years and nothing.
I agree. I think at this point, the goal was to make sure we were all in
Yeah,
agreement
totally.
before we went to city
Yeah,
council.
I think you're recommending a joint,
Yes,
joint meeting, right? Yeah.
correct.
It could be a joint meeting, or it could be on an off night. We could figure out how to schedule that. But no, I think at this point, it sounds like there's enough concurrence from the commission to take this to the planning commission as a work session with the intent that we would follow up with some sort of neighborhood meeting after
The city
that.
council, you mean?
I'm sorry, yeah, city council.
Can I suggest for the city council too, because I think these changes are perfect. Could we maybe have a couple sample diagrams or something?
Sure.
Like a visual aid? Because even, it's just, like you were talking about the height thing, it's good to see that kind of stuff visually. Like, here's what the max is anyway. And I do like to be able to have the two kinds of side yards so that, like, you could have the driveway for the garage by doing a little bit less on one side. So I think showing like some of those flexibility things, like the advantages of it would be great.
Absolutely.
You good, Mr. Stevens?
I am.
Excellent. All right, look at that record time, under pressure.
Hey, the annual report looks fabulous. It's nice to see us put so much graphic and style, so many, it's just, I hope other groups start
Picture
to
of
see
me
that their
running it.
reports could be better too.
Although, could you find more flattering pictures of us? I mean,
I was gonna say.
That's hard to do, Brett.
Somehow we don't have
Look
a
at us.
picture of
We
our
look terrible.
chair. Oh,
Can
come
we
take
do
a-
some photos with some models sitting in for us?
It is what it is.
Well, no, I think.
I know you're
you
working
need
with
to
what you
take-
got, but I mean,
You need to take a picture of the chair because he is not in any of those photos.
Yeah.
I think I did
made,
mention that today at some
yeah.
point.
Staff was
Maybe
made
you're
aware of
lucky
that.
because they were not good lighting.
No.
those look like I'm about to fall asleep, which is probably accurate at the time. And I probably was about to fall asleep, but
In your defense, it was
Except I was
probably
speaking, so-
10:44, so.
Yeah. Oh, I did find one error, just a teeny tiny. On page 6, when we list all the different groups that we have.
We're just
people for-
skipping staff report. We're going right to it.
No, I mean, this is the simple
Is there a
thing.
staff report?
It's on this, what's on the screen.
The staff
Yeah.
report is, hey, this is the
Staff report,
thing.
it's like a paragraph.
Yeah, it's
But
on-
anyway,
it's-
Parks and Recs is missing, and I only noticed it because I have to go to their meetings.
She wants credit for that.
I do. I have gone to a lot of.
I also noticed one error. Doing what I always do is just search for my name in these kinds of documents. But on page 15.
You're the only one who does that. That's crazy.
I'd do that in a minute.
And I had to actually go look at my calendar. On page 15, it says for the 503 East Columbia subdivision that Mr. Krasner and I were absent. I don't think I was absent. I think Mr. Krasner was there. He even seconded the motions. Anyway, I don't know. It's confusing, but I think I was here. I don't know if Brett was here or not, but I think actually Russ was absent.
What was the date?
June 3rd.
June 3rd, where would I be?
pretty sure I was here June 3rd.
Well, and it says you seconded it, so
Yeah, you were.
that's hard to do when you're absent. One of those things is
I was out at the
wrong.
end of June. I took a trip, but I was there in June. Early
Anyway,
June.
I'm pretty sure I was there. I even tried to watch the video, although the first hour and a half of the video, it doesn't exist, which made me worry about all the other videos that don't exist, but. Yeah. I think I was
Mysterious.
there, because when the video was actually running, I think I was in the chair seat. Actually, I Googled it. I think you were running late. Maybe you couldn't get there.
Yes, I
Or
can see,
looked at
it was
search.
my daughter's choir concert. I was running late.
There you go. So, but I don't know who might have been absent,
We
but
have to at least get one photo of you in there. Otherwise, it looks like you never
just
stay there.
Photoshop his face onto me sitting there in that
You
one.
know what we should start doing? You know what we should start doing? That they do in our illustrious neighbor to the northwest and south, otherwise known as Fairfax County. At the beginning of each year in January for the reorganization meeting, they do take a class photo.
Then I'd have to wear nice
And we
pants.
should, so which we should do. We should have a class photo.
The flag
Yeah, we could do it back here, yeah.
My
yeah.
jeans, I can.
Doesn't matter what shoes you wear.
Like the Supreme Court?
I think this is a great idea.
I just wear jeans.
All right, well, you can wear something nicer that day. I don't know.
I can wear fancy
For the
pants one
reorg
day.
meeting, we should take a class photo so we can, keep track of whoever,
This is the
who's on the commission.
sports
Otherwise, how do
center
we know?
trick. You just wear
I think it's a great idea going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway. Any other changes?
No
Great.
other than photographic suggestions, I don't think there's any other changes.
It's nice, it is nice looking.
Yeah, no, it looks fantastic.
Nice glossy spread.
And so relatedly, this will be someone else's duty to present this to city council.
It's really nice looking.
It was nice looking last year. They did the same thing last year, so I was,
I think this one's even more colorful, so it was good.
no, last year's was amazing. No. So we will be having a election on our next meeting, and hopefully we can.
2020 election, very important.
2020
When
election.
is that date? What's our January reorg?
I believe the 6th. And we are hoping, this is, while I am not running this meeting, hoping to also, in addition to doing if you look on the second page, the election of officers, to talk about the work plan going forward. That would give staff, let me sit up straight.
Oh, you taking a picture?
Too late, we're all-
He's hoping.
we're all hungover now.
So this is a change from what we have done in the past, which is we just show up, do this reorg, and then move on. We're trying to, the request by staff, and hopefully the new chair will recognize this new work plan so that we can give them the guidance they need and the time they need for all, based on, you can see the other items on the schedule. This will be very beneficial to them, so.
We're sold.
All right. So January 6th will be just a slightly longer meeting, some brainstorm.
Longer than
items.
this meeting?
No, slightly longer than the
Normal first
20-minute meeting.
Well, Mr. Chair, as your minutes wind down and your tenure
Yes.
here, I guess we should acknowledge the great effort that you've put in and.
Not by putting a photo in the annual report, but in some other way.
Some other way to recognize it.
I think what I'm trying to do is get rid of one of the bad photos and put a photo around it.
And I was going to say,
It's like 14
we appreciate
photos
your
of Lindy.
service.
Yes, 2 years as chairman.
2, I think.
I did 3.
Three, sorry.
Yeah.
Record breaking right
Yeah.
there.
All right. Well, we are
Regular, was it?
10:36. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
All right. We're adjourned.